Love on the Spectrum is a very weird show. I wish I could say that it's a good show, or a bad show, or a problematic show, or an empowering show, or an inspirational show, or an offensive show, but I can't. I mean, I can. I guess I can say it's all of those things, but it's also at the same time something greater than the sum of those parts. Hence, Love on the Spectrum is, for lack of a better term, just a weird-ass show. Before I tried watching the show, I read a ton of different people's opinions on it. Some autistic people said that the show seemed infantilizing to its participants, while other autistic people said that the show felt relatable to them and made them feel seen. Some neurotypical viewers said that the show was cute and wholesome, while other viewers said it seemed patronizing to call these adults going on dates cute and wholesome. And me, well, I've gone back and forth so many times on this show. On the one hand, I love seeing a variety of people I relate to in so many ways express themselves openly on a show that does seem to want to paint a positive portrayal of autism. On the other hand, there definitely were times when the show veered into the territory of treating autistic people like an other, sometimes even going so far as to frame autistic people the way a nature show might represent wild animals. I'm not sure I've ever had quite this level of mixed feelings on something before, especially something as seemingly inconsequential as a Netflix dating show. I don't like Netflix. I don't even use streaming services anymore, other than the brief period where I watched Love on the Spectrum on Netflix last month, partially out of curiosity and partially to make this review. And let's just get this one criticism that I'm seeing everywhere out of the way ahead of time, okay? The overall concept of making a reality dating show about autistic people is not automatically inherently exploitative. Autistic people have the ability to consent to being on a reality dating show just like neurotypical people do. The cast members have the right to make that choice for themselves, and most of them have come out of the experience having positive things to say. My issue with the show isn't that the premise is exploitative in and of itself. In fact, because autistic people tend to build their own communities and tend to communicate differently than neurotypical people, it is interesting to see the different ways that we might approach dating and romantic relationships. It has the potential to educate neurotypical viewers about how the autistic experience might differ from theirs, and also what we might all have in common as humans. But the issue is that this show doesn't do much or really almost anything to educate its neurotypical viewers about how autism works. When we look at how neurotypical viewers tend to react to the show and what they often say about it, we'll see that the show hasn't treated its platform and this opportunity with the responsibility that it deserves. So today I thought I would dive deep into all things Love on the Spectrum and give my opinions about this show, where it works and where it falls short. This video is going to be long, but here's a quick TLDR of where it's going. Love on the Spectrum is above all else a show that has a lot of potential. The show's shortcomings mostly come from the fact that it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists within a larger context of how autism is currently viewed on a global scale, and as a result, the show's producers do have a pretty big responsibility to represent autism in an honest and complete way. And while I think most of the production team's goals are good, the show does sometimes veer into irresponsible territory that can really only be analyzed in the greater context of what it means to be autistic here in the United States in 2025. So let's dive into a show that somehow manages to be comforting, controversial, offensive, unproblematic, and problematic, all at the same time, meaning I guess in a way it does represent a spectrum of its own. Let's talk about the one and only Love on the Spectrum.
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.
Hey everyone, I'm Savvy, and this is Savvy Writes Books. Welcome back. I hope you guys are having a wonderful week. If you are new to this channel, hello, my name is Savvy. I make book reviews, commentary videos about the book community and the publishing industry, other types of reviews and media analysis, video essays, and more. So if those type of videos interest you, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel. I also want to give a thank you to my Patreon supporters. Patreon supporters' names are up on the screen, and if you take a look in my description below, you'll see my $5 a month and up supporters who have the option at that reward tier to link their own stuff in the description below, and a lot of them are doing really cool things like opening up small Etsy shops to sell their own art, creating their own queer indie publishing companies, starting campaigns against the use of generative AI in the arts, and a bunch of other awesome stuff. So check that out in my description below. Now, just a quick question before we head into the main body of our review today. Have you guys noticed my new glasses? Aren't they cute? Well, I really hope you like them because I got them from today's sponsor, Pair Eyewear. And not only did I get these glasses from them, but watch this. Now they're prescription sunglasses too. Pair Eyewear is an online shop for glasses with a very fun shopping experience because during your selection process, you get to choose both base frames and top frames. That means that if I want to wear just my base frames, I can look like this. But what if I want to wear brown glasses today instead of clear glasses? Then, whoa, now I can look like this. But what if I change my mind and I want to wear clear glasses again? Well, whoa! I was first drawn to Pair Eyewear because of this feature, especially when it comes to choosing sun tops, which are the top frames for sunglasses. I love having prescription sunglasses, but it's so easy for me to just misplace them around my house or forget to pack them in my bag. But with these sun tops, I can just carry them around in my pocket with me or keep them in this nice convenient little carrying case that Pair Eyewear sent me. For my base frames, I chose this style called the Murphy because I have a big head, and as a result, I often have a lot of trouble finding glasses. Now, my favorite pair of sun tops I got are these called the Rainbow Gradient Sun Top because I love the pretty rainbow color and I love how they pair together with the clear frames underneath, since this pair of sun tops is like a little bit translucent. It lets a little bit of the light through. But what if I'm feeling like changing up my look when I'm outside in the summer, wearing my sunglasses around? Well, guess what? I can just switch to the Galaxy sun tops instead, and now I have a whole new look going on. Shopping on the Pair Eyewear site is super easy with convenient features like the virtual try-on, plus it's really fun to browse through their big selection. And I just think it's so convenient to have my prescription glasses and my sunglasses be part of the same overall pair of glasses. It just makes my chaotic life a whole lot easier. And if I want to switch up my look with the sunglasses, I can just snap on a new pair of top frames rather than having to go get a whole new pair of glasses. It's just so much more convenient and affordable than having to keep separate pairs of glasses around the house. If you'd like to try Pair Eyewear for yourself, please head to my description box below where you can use my link to get 15% off on your first pair of glasses with my code SavvyWritesBooks15. I hope you enjoy your new glasses as much as I love mine, and I hope that you have fun getting some new sunglass styles to wear outside. Thank you so much to Pair Eyewear for sponsoring this video, and don't forget to check out that link in my description below and use my code SavvyWritesBooks15 for 15% off on your first pair of glasses. Now, let's head back into our deep dive. What is Love on the Spectrum? Love on the Spectrum is a dating reality show, or maybe it's a documentary, depending on whose lawyer you ask, and we're gonna get into what I mean by that in just a bit. Basically, it's a TV series that now has 3 seasons in its American version, which began in 2022. Previously, the show had been popular in Australia with 2 seasons that ran from 2019 to 2021. Today's video is going to focus only on the American version because that's the one I watched. The American version of Love on the Spectrum began in 2022, with its most recent season dropping just a couple months ago in April of 2025. Which was also the month that RFK Jr. gave his big speech showing that he has no idea what autism is, so I also made a video on that topic. I'll link it below if you're interested. The show has already been renewed for a 4th season in the US as well, with the overwhelming response to the show being very positive. The show features various people on the autism spectrum with one thing in common: they're all looking for love, or at least that's how it's marketed. We'll get into that too. Everyone, supposedly, is seeking a romantic relationship, and the show follows each participant as they navigate the dating world, sometimes dating other autistic people, sometimes dating neurotypical people, sometimes dating people with neurodivergences other than autism, like ADHD, Down syndrome, learning disabilities, and a variety of other diagnoses as well. We learn about how autism impacts each individual's dating life and how autism might provide additional challenges to navigate when seeking a relationship. Some participants also consult with a dating coach named Jennifer Cook, who is on the autism spectrum herself as well. Jennifer Cook actually wrote a book about the experience of being an autistic woman, which is an experience that was frequently overlooked until the past decade when we saw the DSM-5 combine the diagnosis for autism with the previously separated diagnosis for Asperger's. Her book is called Autism in Heels. I have it. I am planning to read and review it. I've actually started it already. Hopefully I will get that review out next month, so stay tuned for a video reviewing that book as well. I did really like some of Jennifer's contributions to the show. I thought it was really helpful that the dating coach they hired for the show was autistic herself, and honestly, if they'd hired a neurotypical coach, I would be side-eyeing them really hard right now. But it was cool to see an autistic woman who has a successful marriage help coach people who are new to the dating scene, knowing that she has many of the same experiences processing information in a similar way to what they do. However, some of Jennifer Cook's advice felt kind of weird on the show. Not weird in like a necessarily bad or malicious way, because she does seem to be very nice and very knowledgeable, but weird in a way where it seems like she's trying really hard to make her dating advice as palatable to neurotypical viewers as possible, even though she's an autistic woman coaching fellow autistic people. One example is that she really likes to coach the men on the show to remember to pull out their date's chair at dinner. This is a very heteronormative convention, and it was one that I honestly didn't even know was still around, and it's a convention that most autistic people that I know personally, myself included, wouldn't even think about or consider. And that's not to say that nobody does this. I know that in some parts of the US, especially in southern US communities, it can still be considered customary for a man to pull out a woman's chair at dinner. But it was just weird to me that she gave nearly every couple this advice, especially knowing that from my experience, autistic people are very good at following rules, but only if those rules make logical sense to them. Why specifically should a man pull out a chair for a woman? Is there a reason for that other than just tradition? Does it accomplish any material goals? Well, no, not really. So that's why the majority of autistic people, at least this is again my personal experience, the majority of autistic people I know wouldn't really care about that type of convention. You could say that it serves the purpose of making the woman in the situation feel nice, but if that woman is also autistic, as the majority of people on the show are, more often than not, she's not really going to care about having a chair pulled out for her either, because that's an arbitrary social convention that's based on vibes and cues that aren't always as natural to autistic people. So, like, if one person doesn't know to do it, that's okay, because the other person probably isn't going to care about it. That's my experience, at least. You're entitled to a different opinion if you have one. And again, all autistic people are different, so that's not to say that there are no autistic women who would appreciate a man pulling out their chair. It's just to say that I found it strange how often she gave that type of advice to everyone, and how many people on dates would then apply this advice, thereby just kind of looking like they're going through these motions because someone told them that it was the right way to behave on a date, rather than really having any reasoning as to what purpose that gesture serves. I'll be real, I'm 32 years old, I've been married for nearly 8 years, I'm autistic myself, and I have no idea why someone would care whether someone else pulled out their chair. I don't think the thought has ever even crossed my mind once until I saw the show. So if someone pulled out my chair on a date, like, it wouldn't bother me or anything, but I wouldn't really understand the purpose of the action. It would just seem arbitrary, so it would just be useless for my date to bother worrying about that. At least that's my take. So I like Jennifer Cook, and I like the perspective that she brings as an autistic woman and a mother who's had a long-term marriage and has had kids with a partner, but I also sometimes feel like her advice is meant to appease the neurotypical viewers of the show, like saying, hey, see, autistic people can learn to behave in a way that you would find normal, rather than saying, like, autistic people might act differently than you expect on a date, but that's okay because they'll find the person who's right for them. I will also say that that is a pretty minor criticism I have, because a lot of the time Jennifer does take each individual participant's autistic traits into account. For example, in season 3, we meet Madison, who has a special interest in dolls, much like me, if you couldn't tell. When she's getting ready to go on a date, Madison wants to bring dolls with her because they're a source of comfort. And I get that. I've brought dolls on dates too. I brought dolls bar hopping. I brought dolls to concerts. To concerts where everyone's doing drugs. My dolls do drugs too. I bring dolls to hangouts at friends' houses. I play with my dolls. I bring them with me on outings, just like Madison does. My favorite place to bring dolls is to WNBA games. When Madison sits down for her first coaching session with Jennifer, Jennifer acknowledges that Madison would feel more comfortable on the date having dolls with her, but they both agree that bringing a ton of dolls on a date would be cumbersome. So they decide together that Madison should bring 2 dolls with her in a backpack, and that way she can have them there with her as a source of comfort, but they won't be in the way of her enjoying the date. And hey, if the guy she's out with doesn't like the dolls, then they're probably not gonna work out long term anyway. So that's an example of me really loving Jennifer's advice and finding it very well tailored to each individual's neurodivergent traits. All in all, Jennifer's advice was pretty hit or miss for me. It would hit really hard sometimes, and other times I'd be like, girl, what the fuck are you talking about? At times, she really did focus on accommodating people, and other times she seemed like she was focusing on too much on making sure the behavior behavior seemed normal from a neurotypical perspective. Overall, Love on the Spectrum has received a widely positive response from both viewers and critics, even going on to be nominated for and even winning multiple Primetime Emmy Awards. Additionally, many of the cast members, including those who found happy long-term relationships on the show and those who didn't, speak positively of the experience, claiming to be treated well by the production crew, and as far as I could tell, no one seems to express regret for having participated in the show. In fact, many of the cast members have gone on to build large social media followings, which have helped them launch and expand their own businesses. Like Abby, for example, who crochets hats and is looking into potentially launching a singing career in the future. And Madison, who creates handmade jewelry and sells it on her website and at craft fairs. And Danny, who runs an inclusive animation studio. And Kaylin, who works in education with other autistic people and runs an Instagram account providing advice about how to manage autism triggers in a fairly ableist world while finding your own place to thrive. Does it represent the whole spectrum? Yes and no. I mean, it's literally impossible to represent an entire autism spectrum or any spectrum because a spectrum is by definition infinite. So what I'm really looking at here is how well the show did at representing a variety of different experiences of a diverse range of autistic people. The show did well in some ways and fell short in others. For example, we saw a huge range of ages from the youngest participant, 18-year-old Journey, to the oldest, 63-year-old Steve. We saw a range in diagnosis ages from people like Abby, who were diagnosed with autism as young children, to, once again, people like Steve, who didn't learn they had autism until adulthood, and in Steve's case, he didn't know until he was in his 50s. The show had some racial diversity, but it really could have done better. The majority of the participants were white, and they didn't really have much diversity. We did thankfully have some people of color on the show, and I appreciate that. While the majority of relationships represented were between a man and a woman, we did get some people from the LGBTQ community as well, like Journey, who is a lesbian, or Perry, who's a young bisexual woman. We also had a decent range of different support needs. I don't know if I'll have time to even get into the whole idea of like autism support needs and how the idea of diagnosing people's level 1, 2, or 3 autism is, you know, not always an exact science and is sometimes somewhat of a capitalist informed process, which is a totally different thing. But I will say we did see a variety of different needs from different people. A lot of people have this image in their mind of autism as meaning like social awkwardness or meaning learning disabilities or sensory issues. And yes, while some autistic people can experience some or all of those things, not every person will experience all of them. So I like that we got to see a variety of different people at different places in their lives, many of whom had a different experience with how autism impacted their lives day to day. But for all of this diversity, we did have a huge glaring hole, and that was economic diversity. Pretty much every cast member of Love on the Spectrum comes from a middle class or upper middle class socioeconomic background, and that's not bad. After all, it's called the middle class because theoretically it's supposed to represent the middle or the largest collection of people in the US. Not that that's always true in this day and age, but as many others have pointed out as well, we didn't get to see how autism might differently impact someone from a low income background. We didn't see how difficult it can be for people in low income housing in inner city schools or people living in rural towns to get diagnosed with autism in the first place, let alone find resources when many schools and programs are already severely underfunded. And the reason I bring that up is that there is an underlying issue with the show's production here. The reason that this show featured only people in fairly financially stable situations is that the show did not pay its cast. Let me repeat that. The cast was not paid. The only way you can take an unpaid job, like being on a TV show for months to years, is if you have some kind of existing safety net. And that doesn't mean the entire cast is rich either. Actually, the fact that the producers of the show didn't pay the cast puts us in a very strange position when it comes to how that impacts middle class autistic people. Recently, I saw James, who was one of my favorite participants on the show, posting on his Instagram the other week about how he wishes he could afford to move out of his parents' house and live on his own, but you know how the housing market is, and I'm over here like, bro, you were on a Netflix show. How is it that you can't afford your own housing after you helped make Netflix, a huge media company, tons of money? That seems wrong, right? Like something seems wrong with that. At least it does to me. So I looked into this, and I'm not the only one who has. Channels like I'm Autistic Now What have also reported on this specific issue as well, but the summary is you don't technically have to pay your cast if you're interviewing them for a documentary. The idea is that, well, after all, a documentary just documents real life, right? So if you're interviewed for a documentary, you're not required by law to be paid. But here's where things get shady. Netflix does have to pay the casts of its reality shows. Shows like Love is Blind, The Ultimatum, shows like that, you know, the other dating reality shows on Netflix. On TikTok, reporter Chrissy Clark has reviewed the contracts of the Love is Blind cast members, and she revealed that each cast member does receive a financial stipend for each stage of the show's production. So other reality dating shows on Netflix are paying their cast members, but not this one. That feels shady to me. Obviously, each person has the right to choose if they want to participate on an unpaid show, but I also don't think it's fair that people are put into that position in the first place. It's like arguing that there shouldn't be any minimum wage because people can just choose not to work for companies that don't pay enough, right? Like, it's a really dangerous path to go down, at least in my opinion. But let's say for the sake of the argument that the show is a true documentary and thus doesn't actually need to pay its cast members. Well then, why is it accepting awards for best reality show? Why is it participating in Netflix's dating reality show universe where cast members recently accepted nominations and then awards for superlatives like Biggest Flirt or Biggest Ray of Sunshine? I just think it's kind of weird that Netflix is willing to categorize Love on the Spectrum as a reality dating show when it comes to accepting accolades, awards, and publicity, but when it comes to paying its cast members, suddenly it's not a reality show, it's a documentary. Like, you just can't have it both ways. But back to our original question, okay? Does the show feature a wide enough variety of the autism spectrum? Part of me says they do represent a fairly diverse range of experiences, but another part of me says no, that while those experiences are varied, they're all very safe portrayals of autism. It does seem that Netflix has a particular image of autism that it's comfortable representing, and that image doesn't encapsulate a lot of people. For example, here's a comment that I saw on the Love on the Spectrum subreddit, which is a place I've been regularly frequenting for this video. We're going to look at a lot of their posts today. This user, Pristine Confection 3, says, I was rejected from the show because I smoke and did drugs. They wanted a more wholesome view of autism. They want to make it cute and infantilizing. Many of us would get rejected and they wouldn't want us. They only want people who appear more innocent, and that is one issue I have with them. Now, okay, disclaimer, it is a random Reddit comment, so I can't verify that it's really true. Maybe this person was lying. Maybe they never actually applied to Love on the Spectrum. People do lie on the internet for fun sometimes. Or maybe they got rejected for a different reason. Maybe they misinterpreted the situation, or maybe they are telling the truth. I have no way to know for sure, but either way, this comment does bring up an interesting point. Where are the autistic stoners? Where are the alternative autistic people? Where are the autistic people with full tattoo sleeves? Or the autistic people with unconventional haircuts dyed in bright neon colors? I ask because, in my experience, that is a very significant portion of the autistic community. A lot of us love smoking weed, okay? It helps with a lot of sensory issues. It helps us slow down and focus on the moment, especially if we're people who also have ADHD that causes impulse control issues. And that could have been a really interesting area for the show to delve into. Now, to be fair, I can understand that the show may have not wanted to show things like drugs, because most drugs outside of things like alcohol and caffeine, most other drugs are still illegal on a federal level, and that could have been a logistical nightmare for the show. But even without addressing things like drugs directly, we still could address autistic people involved in alternative subcultures. In my experience, and the experience of a lot of fellow autistic people I know, alternative communities have been extremely welcoming to disabled and neurodivergent people. Where are the punks and the goths and the hippies and the BDSM enthusiasts? Autistic people are very good at BDSM. You know why? Because we communicate very directly. A lot of us also have a lot of tattoos and piercings because we're very good at sitting still during physically painful procedures. Again, it's a spectrum, so those things won't be true for everybody, but why in 3 seasons of the show have we not seen any people like this? In the next section of the video, we're going to do an overview of the participants in the show, but for this section, I wanted to say that I was a little disappointed that it took us until season 2 to get any discussion of queer relationships. The only out queer person on season 1 is Danny, and we, the audience, don't even learn that Danny identifies as panromantic and demisexual until season 3, when she brings it up in a conversation with her family. The show also exclusively finds men for Danny, never women. I won't say that's biphobia, because we will, as we'll get into in the next section, on season 3 we do have a bisexual woman named Perry, and the show does match her up with women, so that could just be random chance. I'm not too concerned about that. But the reason I bring it up is that the autistic community has a much larger percentage of its population that identifies as LGBTQ+ than we see in the overall general and neurotypical population. In part, this could be due to the fact that things like gender roles, which include how you should dress, how you should look, how you behave, what gender of partner you should have, those things often come from unstated social cues and expectations. So for a lot of autistic people, if we want to have a same-gender relationship or present in a gender non-conforming way, many of us have an easier time moving into that because many of us didn't even pick up on the social pressures telling us to behave in a certain gendered and heteronormative way in the first place. So there's just less like internalized programming to undo. Again, not true for all autistic people. Plenty of autistic people also grow up in high control conservative communities that outwardly, directly say to them, you must get married to an opposite gender partner, have kids, and do the traditional white picket fence lifestyle. But even for those people, many autistic people, myself included, tend to look at the world in a very literal and logical way. And so many of us can't necessarily make sense as to why we have to do these things. So even if an autistic person might not be comfortable expressing a queer identity outwardly while living in a homophobic community, many of us are able to accept it for ourselves internally in our own heads sooner. So my question is, why did we only have 2 participants on the entire show explore same-gender relationships? And why were those 2 of the participants that we each saw for exclusively 1 season each 2 of the people that got the least screen time even on the seasons where they were featured? Where were the transgender or non-binary or gender non-conforming autistic people? Thinking about these things really does bring into focus for me how limited of a view of autism the show has, and you could definitely make the argument that that's just reality TV in general. You don't see a lot of trans people or people in alternative subcultures on shows like Love is Blind or The Ultimatum either. Mainstream reality TV does tend to attract, for lack of a better term, normies. But it's more noticeable of a lack, at least for me, on a show that exclusively features autistic people, just because those ways of living are so much more present in autistic communities than in the overall mainstream general population. But that's just my opinion, and I'm open to the idea that I might be misjudging, so I'm interested to hear your thoughts in the comments below as well. Now, instead of talking about what types of participants the show didn't have, let's talk about the awesome people that we did see on the show. The participants, an overview. In the first season of Love on the Spectrum, we meet the following people. Abby, a woman in her early 20s who loves singing, Disney princesses, Chardonnay, and most of all, lions. She begins dating a man named David, who also loves lions, and the 2 of them have many wonderful dates together at the zoo and at the nature sanctuary. Abby and David are kind of the show's power couple. Their relationship is successful from the get-go, and they stay together throughout all 3 seasons, with season 3 ending with them in talks of maybe moving in together or getting engaged one day. They're a very nice couple. They seem very happy together. Abby's mom, Christine, I have a huge issue with, or rather many huge issues with, but we'll get to her later. Abby and David are a very nice couple, and I wish them all the best. We also meet Danny, a woman who runs a small animation studio called Dannymation. She's very passionate about animation and nerd culture. She loves going to Comic Cons, working on animated movies, and running a summer camp to help autistic kids learn about animation as well. I think that's awesome. Autistic kids should have adult autistic role models. Danny is also very proud of the fact that she has a master's degree, and she has very high standards for dating, which I think is awesome, but some people don't, because guess what? Misogynists also view this show. Danny's longest relationship on the show is with a man named Adon, who is also studying animation. Their relationship ends up failing after a year because Adon doesn't feel comfortable having sex before marriage, but Danny isn't comfortable having a long-term relationship without sex. Basically, while they were compatible in many ways on paper, their needs were ultimately incompatible, unfortunately. Then we have Kaylin, who very sadly only stays on the show for 1 season. We're going to talk later about some of the reasons why they didn't renew her contract and why I want to see her back, but she's only there for season 1. Kaylin is one of those women who gets told, you don't look autistic, or you don't seem autistic, but hey, guess what? She is autistic. She lives with her best friend as her roommate, and she also has very high standards for dating. Kaylin is another controversial cast member because she has stated that she prefers to date men who are not autistic, and her reason for that is that she wants someone who has opposite strengths and weaknesses as her. She'd rather have someone where they complement each other rather than having too many of the same things in common. We also meet Steve, who's probably my favorite person on the show. Legit, I am serious. If I were 30 years older, I would have dated Steve, no question, and without a doubt, Steve would break up with me because I can be way too much to handle, and you know what? I would respect him for it. Steve is the oldest member of the cast at 63 years old. He didn't learn he had autism until his 50s, so it's still new for him, but he's always had trouble with romantic relationships, and he's been feeling lonely as he's been getting older, so he's looking for someone to share his life with. Steve also has an amazing voice. He should be a radio announcer. Maybe one day I can hire Steve to narrate something for me. When he talks, it is magic. This dude has a voice, okay?
You know what? I have a good feeling. Wow, isn't that something?
Then we meet James, a man in his 30s who lives in Boston and works in the tech industry. James was also one of my favorite people on the show because I felt like I was watching my friends, like the friends I have had in middle school, high school, college, all the friends I've had throughout my life are exactly like James. He has nerdy interests, he loves Renaissance fairs, he loves dressing in medieval costumes, he likes wearing shirts that look like they came from Dan Flash's.
That's how they value the shirt. The more the lines crisscross and the patterns overlap.
It was just so much fun to see James on this show because he's literally every male friend that I've had since middle school. Same interests, same way of talking, same attitude. It was just very familiar to me to see someone like James. And I will say that James is probably the closest we get to someone who's involved in alternative subcultures. He's very into cosplaying, he loves LARPing, he does things like that, and he also occasionally sings in a metal band. Dude, I love James. James is great. And then finally, season 1 brought us Sabode, who doesn't stay on the show very long either, but does bring a certain charm to the show. Some people might find Sabode's interviews a little triggering since the producers ask him questions that kind of look like they want him to perform as Rain Man. Like they ask him, okay, on this date during this year, what day of the week was it? And then he answers correctly every time. And then they ask him to multiply big numbers in his head and he does it and gets it right. Now, I personally don't mind that they're showing autistic savants on the show because Sabode is the only person that they have do these type of exercises. And, you know, that experience is still part of the spectrum. Some autistic people can do those things. The other cast members don't do those things. And so the show isn't really trying to say, all autistic people have like math superpowers like this, but you know, some can do that. That's the truth. It was actually really exciting for me to see Sabode doing quick mental math and naming exact dates with precise accuracy because I can sort of do that too. It's not something I talk a lot about publicly, and I'm nowhere near as good at it as Sabode is, but I have a really strong memory, and sometimes things like that just pop up in my brain. Back when Tyler and I first started dating in 2007, neither of us knew that I had autism yet, and I thought everyone could just do the weird date thing and remember weird details like I could, and that they just weren't doing it because they were too lazy or something. I was so judgmental back then. So sometimes I'd be like, hey Tyler, did you know that 5 months ago today on May 16th, 2007, it was a Wednesday and I was wearing a purple shirt with a picture of a horse on it that I got at Charlotte Russe at the mall, and you were wearing a striped polo shirt and a golf cap? And he'd be like, what the fuck? One day I was in grad school and I was sitting in class and I just like suddenly popped up and was like, guys, I just realized that today is the 3-year anniversary of the first time I ever ate a poached egg. And everyone was like, girl, what? Now, if you were to ask me at random, like what a day of the week was on a given day in a given year, I can't guarantee that I'd get it right every time, but I can probably do it a lot better than the average person can. And I'm very good at quick mental math. I always have been. Sometimes I just enjoy converting Celsius to Fahrenheit for fun. Like if we're watching a British show and I'll be like, oh, that many degrees, that's this in Fahrenheit. And Tyler's like, how do you know that? The other day he was heating up the vape and he was joking about how he accidentally switched it from Celsius to from Fahrenheit to Celsius, one of those ways. And he was like, I was supposed to heat it up to 200 degrees, but I'd accidentally switched it back to Fahrenheit. And I was like, oh, so you had to heat it up to 392? And he was like, how did you do that? I looked it up, I was right. My point is, it was really cool to see another person with like number and calendar autism. It's interesting to see. So that is our cast for season 1. In season 2, we have a lot of the same people returning, and we also add a couple new cast members. Most notably, we meet Connor, who is a 25-year-old guy who loves swords, fantasy novels, British television, and dogs. Like many autistic people, Connor struggles with changes to his routine, which is one of the main things holding him back from dating. In the past, he thought that dating would bring too many changes with it, experiencing new romantic feelings, experiencing new responsibilities, trying new things. That was all very stressful for him. But now he's interested in stepping outside of his comfort zone and trying to meet a nice girl that he clicks with. We also meet Tanner, who's also 25 years old, also another one of the big iconic cast members from the later seasons. He lives in an apartment with 2 roommates who are also neurodivergent themselves, and he works as a housekeeper at a hotel. Tanner is a Southern gentleman, and he always brings a ton of energy and a positive attitude with him to the show. Tanner and I share one special interest: primates, the evolution of the gorilla, pan, and homo genuses, geni, I'm not actually sure on that one. But we both love gorillas. When I get into the podcast interview sections later, we'll see how Tanner loves to talk about gorillas. And Tanner, if you're watching this, I relate. From like 5th grade through the middle of college, I would just regularly info dump in the middle of conversation about gorillas, bonobos, chimpanzees, and more, even when it wasn't relevant and the other person didn't ask. In middle school, I was obsessed with Coco, the sign language gorilla, before I learned some of the research done regarding her was kind of faulty. We're not going to get into that though. In college, I was really invested in the lives of Kanzi and Tico, the bonobos at the Language Research Center in Iowa, to the point where I almost considered switching majors from film and creative writing to animal psychology. I never did. I wonder how the world would be different now if I had. My favorite thing about Tanner is that he likes to talk about how gorillas are cool because they have similar ears and hands to humans, and dude, same. One of my favorite autistic stoner activities is to take about 25 milligrams of THC and put on evolution documentaries where I learn all about extinct primate species that are closer in relation to humans than gorillas and bonobos are. My favorite is the Australopithecus. I once saw this cool model of Lucy, the famous Australopithecus constructed from old bones, at the Field Museum in Chicago. So Tanner, if you're out there watching this and you ever want to talk about the Australopithecus, I'm your girl. And I think you'd really like the Field Museum. If you're ever in Chicago, hit me up. We'll go to the Field Museum. It'll be great. Tanner very quickly became an audience favorite, mainly due to his big smile and his upbeat energy. But as we'll get into in the audience reception part of this video, this has led to a lot of people dehumanizing Tanner, frequently comparing him to a dog, giving him golden retriever energy. And while, yeah, having golden retriever energy is definitely fun, it's definitely something I strive to have as well, the way people talk about Tanner, it goes beyond that, and it often leads people to treating him as if he doesn't have agency in his own life and is instead living for the benefit of others, which becomes a huge problem. And the comparison of him to a dog becomes really problematic when we look at the types of ABA therapy and the types of, for lack of a better word, training he went through as a child, because like his parents did kind of train him like a dog, and there's a whole thing going on with that. Tanner's kind of a walking red flag, which I don't mean that he himself is problematic. Everything I see shows that he's a very kind, optimistic, high energy, considerate young man. He seems great, but he also shows a lot of signs that many fellow autistic people quickly clocked as high masking, extreme people pleasing to the point of anxiety. I personally have a theory that Tanner's appearance on the show was more about his mom wanting to find fame for herself, and I say this because 1, Tanner's mom went on to start her own podcast off of his fame, which we're going to break down later in the video. 2, Tanner's mom takes him on lots of right-wing adjacent clout-hungry girl boss style podcast interviews to get him extra press. And 3, Tanner does not even want a relationship. Yes, you heard that right. Tanner did not sign up for Love on the Spectrum on his own free will because he was genuinely struggling to find a connection. Tanner actually didn't apply for the show at all. He didn't request to be cast on the show looking for a lifelong partner. He actually has no interest in dating, and he says as much on the show. Actually, Tanner's mom, Nikki, who's kind of a failed fitness influencer, enjoyed watching Love on the Spectrum, both the Australian and American versions, and then, when she saw they were casting for the American show, she submitted Tanner's application. Tanner did not apply. She literally straight up admits this in a podcast interview out loud as if this is normal. We're going to get into that in the podcast interview section later on, but keep in mind that Tanner has never shown any interest in dating. He did not apply to the show on his own volition, and after doing 2 seasons of the show, he still to this day states that he's not interested in dating or relationships, and he even speaks on podcasts about how people pressuring him to date makes him uncomfortable. Yeah. When we first meet Tanner during his first interview, the producer asks him, "What are you looking for in a relationship?" And Tanner replies by asking, "What is a relationship again? I can't remember." And he's not being sarcastic here. He's sincerely asking this. Tanner does not spend any time in his life thinking about relationships, to the point where he doesn't really remember what they are and they aren't on his mind at all, even when being interviewed for a show about finding a relationship. On top of that, Tanner has these constant people-pleasing tendencies and seems to live every second of his life in fear of disappointing his mom. While being interviewed, he often looks off screen to his mom for approval and asks her things like, "Am I doing my eyebrows right? Am I smiling enough? Does my face look right?" Why is Tanner living in so much fear of how he's being perceived, or more specifically, how his mom is perceiving him when she's not even visible on camera? I know what I think the answer is. I think it has something to do with the fact that his mom has openly admitted to putting him in ABA therapy as a kid, putting him in over 30 hours a week of ABA therapy as a kid. When Tanner was a little boy, his mom subjected him to a full-time job's work week's worth of non-stop autism conversion therapy. For those of you who don't have much background or knowledge on ABA or know why some people suspect at least some of its practices to be comparable to conversion therapy. Stay tuned, we are going to unpack that as well. So that's all to say that while Tanner is a really positive force with really kind and genuine energy, to autistic viewers, he comes across as someone that we worry about, someone we can see ourselves in when we're masking for other people's benefit. And I think neurotypical viewers and autistic viewers have a wildly different interpretation of Tanner. Many neurotypical viewers can't get over how adorable and sweet and wholesome he seems, while many autistic viewers like myself instantly see him and go, oh no, this man has been through some shit. He's trying really, really hard to please everyone, and it makes us sad and anxious. We're gonna unpack more about Tanner and his nasty ass mom later though, okay? In season 2, we also get our first LGBTQ dating plot. We meet 18-year-old Journey, who lives in Chicago, just like me, so that's awesome. Journey was diagnosed with autism in high school, and she's also new to the dating world. She's also recently realized she's a lesbian, and she's ready to try meeting some girls and going out on dates. Funnily enough, autistic lesbians from Chicago, I'm pretty sure, are the primary demographic of my YouTube viewers, so if you're an autistic lesbian, comment below, and bonus points if you live in or near Chicago or ever have. Like, I guess that means that statistically speaking, Journey is the cast member who is most likely to be watching this video right now. So if you're watching this video, hey Journey, what's up? You're cool. You deserved a lot more screen time. In season 3, we meet a few more interesting people. Unfortunately, Steve is now gone as well, which is a shame because they never really seemed to try to find any good matches for Steve. The last match they tried to find for Steve was this woman named Sharona, who was like keep in mind, Steve is this very chill, likes to stay at home, likes to go on walks, very like low-key kind of guy. They find him this woman named Sharona, who is like a party girl who loves drinking, and she also can't stop talking about how she was in the IDF and she really loved being in the IDF, and if she gets to know Steve well enough, she can't wait to spill lots of secrets about Israel to him.
Where are you from?
Israel.
Wow.
I'm a nice girl. I'll take you to Israel.
Wow, we.
I have a lot of secrets.
So that was really fucking weird and unsettling, and I didn't like that at all, and neither did Steve, because he was so polite about it. He was like, she was a bit much. But like, my point is with Steve, they never even tried, okay? But if I've learned anything from watching the Great British Bake Off, it's that Netflix core feel-good reality shows always forget about the older people. We do get a second LGBTQ member of the cast in season 3, Perry, who has recently come out as bisexual. Unlike many of the other members of Love on the Spectrum, Perry already does have some dating experience, but only with a boyfriend that she had in the past, and now she wants to try to find a girlfriend since she's recently accepted her bisexual identity. Perry is one of my favorite cast members, even though she's only on season 3 and we don't see as much of her as we do of some of the other cast, but Perry is our resident train autist. I was legitimately surprised that we'd gone 2 full seasons of a show about the autism spectrum without having anyone obsessed with trains, but in season 3, we get our train person, and she's a woman. I say this as a woman who quite likes trains myself. Perry has a special interest in Boston's transit system with a train line called the T. She's even created a little fan club for it where she and a group of friends meet up to ride the trains around town. She ends up going on a few dates with a woman, and then she convinces this woman to ride the train with her, and everything seems good. Honestly, the queer relationships on the show were some of the nicest to watch, and I didn't expect Netflix to do that well, so that was awesome. One other major addition in season 3 is Madison, who showed up on the screen right as I was literally living her life, okay? Listen, Madison is in her 20s. She designs and hand makes jewelry for a living. So, setting the scene for you, okay? I'm sitting at my coffee table, making some new bracelets, beading new beads onto a string for things that I'm going to take to book signings and upcoming events I have, when Madison pops on the screen and is like, hi, I'm Madison and I make jewelry. And I was like, no way, girl, I'm making jewelry right now. And then Madison tells us that she has a collection of 40 American Girl dolls. And I was like, no way, me too. In fact, 26 of my American Girl dolls are sitting right behind me right now while I'm beading bracelets. So Madison and I have a lot in common, it seems, and the commonalities only continued. Madison ends up in a successful long-term relationship with a man named Tyler, and Tyler is my husband's name, so I was like, thanks, Madison, now they'll never cast me on Love on the Spectrum since they've already covered my life story with you. I mean, they were never going to cast me on Love on the Spectrum anyway because I'm already married, but you get my point. The only difference being, okay, Madison is sober and I'm pretty sure she's straight, and I am nothing anyone would call even close to sober or even close to straight, but I can guarantee that if Madison smoked a joint and had a bisexual awakening, she would immediately transform into Savvy. Overall, the cast members on the show are a lot of fun. We see a range of different people, some of them who live with their parents, some who live in their own apartments or houses, some who have roommates, some who have careers, some who don't, some who are still in college, some who are old enough to retire, retire. Basically, we get a spectrum. And we also get a spectrum in terms of parents. I was already a little turned off by the fact that there was so much parent involvement in this show, since autism parents already try to hijack autism advocacy conversations when actually autistic people are trying to talk about our own self-advocacy. So I didn't think the show needed to show nearly every participant's parents, but a lot of parents wanted to be on the show, and a lot of them were. Much like the cast, the parents exist across a wide spectrum too, but their spectrum is more like, some of these parents are cool, and some of them want to make me rip my fucking hair out. So with that in mind, let's move to our next section, Meet the Autism Parents. The amount of involvement each participant's parents have in this show is excessive. To be fair, yes, families are an important part of people's lives. If I were in a documentary about anything at all, my mom would probably make an appearance because I have a close relationship with my family. There's nothing wrong with the parents doing a couple interviews. And considering some of the cast members do live with their parents, yeah, it makes sense that they're present in the show. But the amount of focus the show puts on the parents is nothing short of gratuitous. I feel like 1 or 2 short snippets per season of each cast member's mom or dad would be enough, more than enough even, but some of these parents have to show up in every single episode to give their opinion on everything, and then later when we get to the podcast interviews and the press outside of the show, we're going to see that a lot of these parents can't seem to stop taking the spotlight for themselves when the show is not even about them. Now, I want to be clear, not all the parents are the problem. Some of the people on the show have fantastic families that serve as a great example of how parents of autistic people can support their loved ones. For example, James probably has the best parents that an autistic person can possibly have. And that's because James's parents treat him like a whole complete person. His dad is a snarky Boston man, and he loves to tease James about things like wishing he would cut his hair, and then they have this back and forth banter like any New Englander father and son would. His parents regularly encourage him to try things outside of his comfort zone, like a speed dating event, but they don't pressure him, and they don't try to exert any control over his dating life. They appear in the background of the show as side characters where they belong. James's dad in particular is great at talking about James in the context of his various qualities and interests. Yes, autism is a core part of any autistic person, but it's not the only trait that person has. James's dad never goes on camera to talk about how difficult it was to raise him, or what autism signs he exhibited as a child, or what daily tasks he helps him with, if any. Instead, James's dad just talks about James, about how James likes the Renaissance Fair, how he once offered him $500 to cut his hair because he thinks James would look better with short hair, but James declined, and now it's a running joke between them. He regularly gives James boomer-ass dating advice in the way that a lot of millennials can relate to our parents talking to us, things like happy wife, happy life, to which James counters, happy house, happy spouse, don't be sexist, dad. Basically, it's a lot of goofy father-son relationship banter like any other. James's parents are excellent examples of how autism parents don't need to make being an autism parent their entire personality, or really any part of their personality at all. Rather, they treat their son as an individual and develop an individual relationship with him as a person. Actually, the more I was thinking about autism moms and autism dads, I really think of how weird of an identity that is to take for yourself, making your own identity about somebody else's disability. When I got diagnosed with scoliosis at age 11, and then I spent middle school in a back brace, going to orthopedist visits, doing physical therapy, having to deal with a variety of physical limitations, my mom was there to help me through it all, but never once did my mom call herself a scoliosis mom. Never once did she make that her identity. And now that I've learned that I'm autistic in my 30s, guess what? My mom has never called herself an autism mom, because that is a fucking weird thing to do. Your kids are separate individuals from you. They are not your identity. I will say though, I do call myself a pit bull mom. That's my only blank mom identity I will accept. Shout out to all the other pit bull moms out there. When it comes to James and his family, I really appreciate that Love on the Spectrum gives us this positive representation of a healthy parenting dynamic. The problem comes when the show puts James's parents and their relationship on the same level as the relationship between Tanner and his mom, or Abby and her mom. The show presents these parent-child relationships equally, as if every parent is equally valid in their approach, and that's just not true. When it comes to raising a neurodivergent child, or any child at all really, James's parents are objectively correct in their approach, and Tanner's mom, Nikki, is objectively wrong. The way she talks down to Tanner, infantilizes him, recalls 30 plus hours a week of ABA therapy she subjected him to as a child, and encourages him to look to her for approval of his facial expressions and the way he talks, that is not right. That is a controlling way of parenting, and it is objectively wrong. And it's an issue that the show does nothing to differentiate between these parenting styles, instead choosing to show them all as if they have the same weight. Maybe the show was trying to remain unbiased, as many would say a good documentary should be. But there's a difference between remaining unbiased and spreading misinformation. Because, as we'll get into shortly, people like Tanner's mom are going on podcasts to say things about, well, it's normal to question if vaccines cause autism, right? It's normal for me to wonder that. Everyone has a period where they suspect vaccines cause autism, right? Wrong. That is not a viewpoint that should be treated with any credibility because it's been disproven. It is wrong. You might as well enter a debate into whether or not the earth is flat while you're at it. A lot of the parents on this show are great, but many of the awesome parents take up a lot less screen time, which is good. The fact that they want less screen time is part of what makes them better parents for the show. On the other hand, it leads to these weird, culty, MAGA-adjacent conspiracy theorists like Tanner's mom, or overbearing and controlling people like Abby's mom to gain the most fame from the show and the most pull within the public narrative about autism. I've already talked about how great James's parents are, but Perry's mom is also awesome. She's almost never on camera, and when she is, it's once again to talk to Perry like a normal person. Journey's mom appears very rarely, and when she does appear, she just kind of shares motherly words of encouragement. She doesn't give extensive interviews about how much her daughter's autism impacts her personal life. Danny's parents aren't in the picture, but she's very close with her aunt and uncle, and they're pretty nice too. Madison's parents are they're okay in the sense that they appear very rarely on the show and they aren't trying to gain an influencer following from it, or at least that's how it seems. But they're bad in the sense that they really come off like AI generated people. Everything they say sounds so scripted and rehearsed to the max. They just sound like robots. They don't sound right to me. Connor's mom is on thin fucking ice. We're gonna get to her, okay? And if you're watching this, like, Savvy, why do you care about these parents' political beliefs? Why are you making this political? Because right now, in the year of our Lord 2025, autism itself is political. And not just now, autism has always been political. Later in the video, when we get into the audience reception section, we're going to talk at length about how autism, neurodivergence, and other disabilities have been used in the eugenics movement and have directly fueled far right-wing groups, even leading to things like Nazi Germany. The rights and protections of autistic people to exist in society, to have accommodations that allow us to reach our full potential, and to be free from forcible imprisonment, sterilization, or institutionalizing, that is all political. It is determined through legal policy. So if you're the parent of someone autistic and you support Trump, or you support RFK Jr., or if you support really any members of the current American far right, I'm gonna say it, you do not really love your child. You might think you love your child, but when you support people who spread these type of beliefs about autism, you are helping sentence people like your child to a life of torture and potentially death at the hands of the state. And yes, to Tanner's mom, Nikki Smith, that is targeted at you. I am your biggest hater and I am proud of it, and I hope I made you feel really bad today. But we'll get into all of that later, don't worry. Now, I'm not saying I know the participants on this show better than their own parents do. I'm saying that what we see on TV as viewers is all that we get to see, and this is what these parents are choosing to show us. For an autistic audience, this can reflect a lot of traumatic experiences that we've gone through ourselves. Shout out to the Reddit user Undeniable Fruit, who transcribed this bit from an interview with Tanner's mom and posted it to the Love on the Spectrum subreddit. Here is what Tanner's mom, Nikki, had to say about autism and vaccines. Tanner's mom is describing Tanner's life from day one. He was a perfectly healthy, strapping little boy. He hit all the milestones early. And then she says something along the lines of, in the winter of 2000, we were taking a trip to Illinois and he had a head cold and we got him his 2-year vaccinations and I started him on an antibiotic. I wanted to stay away from antibiotics at that time, but I didn't want him to be miserable on a cross-country trip. Then she goes on to say, shortly thereafter, he went from a bubbly, happy little face to completely flat. And then we'll get into more ridiculous things Tanner's mom has said when we break down the podcast interviews. Then we have Abby's mom, Christine, who has to bring up in every single interview that she does that she thinks Asperger's should go back into being a separate diagnosis, that there are different kinds of autism, and that people like me, who didn't learn we're autistic until adulthood, don't have anything at all in common with her daughter. Which is weird because I actually have quite a lot in common with Abby, from occupational therapy to an extremely powerful memory to intense separation anxiety as a child leading to meltdowns and a whole lot more. Recently, Abby's mom, Christine, got into a controversy for sharing videos on her TikTok defending RFK Jr., the man who currently serves as the greatest living threat to autism rights and autonomy in the US. And for once, the Love on the Spectrum subreddit actually came through for me. So on a post talking about how Abby's mom is sharing videos defending RFK Jr., someone asked, where's Kian in all of this? So Kian here, they're referring to Kian O'Cleary, the producer for Love on the Spectrum. He's often the guy behind the camera who's asking questions during the interviews. And I think to ask, where's Kian? Where's the producer? Is a valid question. Where's Kian? Exactly. That's the biggest red flag for me. He is a non-autistic man making money, and quite a lot of it, off of autistic people who are being paid nothing. I gave him benefit of the doubt because the tone of the show seemed a bit positive and thought maybe he does truly care about autistic people. But the fact that he's been silent is very telling. It was never about real advocacy. It was about surface level awareness, enough to get lots of streams and views and generate income without ever standing for anything or anyone's rights. And his production is piping lots of people one direction or another because of the neutral stance. I wish they'd take a stand one way or another officially at Netflix on this. Netflix even paid Trixie and Katya, who are already famous and making money, to review it and to be nice about it. I don't follow Trixie and Katya, so I can't speak to that, although I've heard good things about them. But yes, I agree with these comments. Kian is profiting off of autistic people. He's making a documentary about autistic people. He's not paying them, and he's the one profiting from his show. And yet, where's his voice in all of this? He's okay with making money off of autistic people, but then when the parents who got famous from his show use their new platforms they got from him to spread misinformation that harms autistic people on a global scale, he's just silent about that. He just counts his money in the corner and pretends it's not happening. Autistic people don't have that privilege. The show is giving these parents a platform to do this. Nobody would know who they are without the show Love on the Spectrum. They gained their followings on social media because their sons and daughters were on a Netflix show, and now these parents are using that following they gained to spread harmful misinformation that actively leads to the abuse with the eventual goal of extermination of autistic people. If Love on the Spectrum cares about educating people about autism, they need to be truthful about how autism works. They need to share up-to-date scientific information and put a stop to the idea that vaccines and autism are linked in any way. Other than, okay, maybe I'll say vaccines and autism are linked in one way, which is that vaccines allow more children to live long enough to get an autism diagnosis in the first place, whereas pre-vaccine children would just die in infancy. We're in an era right now where the US is very divided, and people like RFK Jr. are using autism as a way to further fuel that divide. When you've got RFK threatening to create autism registries and making speeches about how vaccines cause autism without any scientific proof, it is the responsibility of shows like this, shows that profit off of the autistic community, to share what the actual medical information says. Even if it goes against what these parents believe, if Love on the Spectrum wants to be a true documentary, not a reality show, if it really wants to sell itself as a documentary, it needs to commit to providing real information with actual sources. One other thing that a few of these parents promote, mainly the two parents I have the most beef with, Tanner's mom and Abby's mom, is that they're supporters of ABA therapy. So before we go any further, let's take a quick minute to talk about ABA therapy, what it is, how it works, and why it's considered controversial in disabled communities. A quick side quest, what is ABA therapy? So when I was a kid, I had occupational therapy, and many other cast members on the show did as well. Occupational therapy helped me with things like learning how to walk on my whole feet instead of just using my toes. It helped me eventually get to the point where I default to walking on my whole feet naturally. I also had leg braces to help me with that. Plus, it helped catch me up with delays in my motor skill development. For me, it was just gross motor skill development I had an issue with, so I couldn't like throw a frisbee or kick a ball. I couldn't do things like that. But like I could write my name from a very early age. I was always good at writing letters and drawing pictures, so my fine motor skills were actually advanced. Having types of disparities like this is very common in autistic kids, and even kids like me that didn't know at the time that we were autistic, to have these like spiky profiles, which I'll talk a little more about later. ABA therapy, though, is different from occupational therapy. ABA therapy isn't there to help you gain greater motor control and work on literally walking through the world effectively. ABA is there to change your behavior and make you act for lack of a better term, less autistic and more normal. As a quick disclaimer, I do also want to say that I can see why some parents might have chosen to put their kids in ABA therapy, especially 20 years ago when many of these parents were making this decision. 20 years ago, we didn't have a lot of publicity from autistic adults speaking up about how they had found their experience in ABA to be abusive, so parents at the time genuinely didn't know. Plus, I can see how if your child is having these like physical meltdowns that lead to them hurting themselves or hurting others, I can see why you might want to try something to help them find and develop coping mechanisms, especially if this is being marketed as a reputable therapy. But ABA is not and has never been a one-size-fits-all cure. In fact, it is a one-size-fits-almost-nobody and might give you lifelong PTSD kind of thing. So let's get into it. ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. It is a method that was first developed in the 1960s by Dr. Ole Ivar Lovaas, who is famous for quotes like the following, which he told Psychology Today in 1974. You start pretty much from scratch when you work with an autistic person. You have a person in the physical sense. They have hair, a nose, a mouth, but they are not people in the psychological sense. Yes, the most common form of autism therapy was developed by a man who did not believe autistic people were fully human until they worked with him. He literally viewed us as subhuman, as below neurotypical people in a social hierarchy. He literally thought of neurotypical people as, for lack of a better term, the master race. The Child Mind Institute website has a page that gives a lot of background information on ABA therapy, which explains, over the last few decades, applied behavior analysis has grown into a broad group of approaches and techniques designed to help children with autism. Principles of behavioral therapy, positive reinforcement of desired behaviors, are used, usually intensively, to help autistic kids develop skills they're not acquiring naturally and to reduce behaviors that are harmful to them, like self-injury. But ABA has expanded and become more common. It has also acquired critics among parents and autism advocates who take issues with its methods and the way they are used by some practitioners. While use of aversive reinforcement is generally gone, there is still a complaint that ABA therapy, which can involve a lot of repetition, is tough on the children, and the skills they learn don't necessarily generalize to other situations. The East Coast Public Access Station, WHYY, also published an article in October of 2022 breaking down some of the controversies we've seen with ABA therapy. When parents first heard about applied behavior analysis in the 1990s, it felt like a lifeline for both them and their autistic kids. ABA was an intensive therapy based around a system of rewards and punishments designed to change children's behavior through repetition and consistent reinforcement. Good behaviors could be formed while undesirable ones were eliminated. The therapy was individualized and time-consuming to the tune of 40 hours a week, and it needed to be delivered early in a child's development. Suddenly, parents were seeing positive results. For some, it offered the promise of normalcy for their kids. For others, the humbler goal of making their family lives more manageable. But over the past few years, the first generation of kids to receive intensive ABA has grown up, and they're telling a different story. Instead of being a key that unlocked their freedom, that unlocked their brains from the confines of autism, many have criticized ABA as harmful and even abusive, calling it conversion therapy for autistic people. ABA practitioners and experts have defended the therapy, saying that they've seen major changes for the better and that progress it offers outweighs its potential for damage. But self-advocates aren't convinced, with some saying that with other therapeutic options available, there's no reason to keep ABA at all. Maybe, they say, it should be scrapped altogether. Maybe it's simply rotten to the core. One of the reasons that many autistic people consider ABA to be comparable to conversion therapy is that it focuses on making autistic people act normal, or act in a way that is deemed normal by neurotypical standards. Sure, it's important to learn coping mechanisms for behaviors that might be physically harmful to yourself or others, but most autistic stimming is perfectly harmless. As many autistic people, myself included, argue, most stims do nothing worse than mildly annoy neurotypical people, and that's a sign that those people should expand their definition of what counts as normal behavior rather than forcing thousands of autistic people to conform to behaviors that feel completely unnatural, which only serves to exhaust us and force us to not be ourselves. For example, many common stims include things like bouncing, hand flapping, eyes darting around, things like that. These behaviors are harmless. I can't hold eye contact with other people for long because it starts to make me both physically and emotionally uncomfortable. The solution to that is not to provide me with electroshock therapy until I've been trained Pavlov style to stare people in the eyes and push past all the pain I'm feeling, often to the detriment of my own ability to focus on what's really happening. The solution is to educate neurotypical people about the fact that eye contact is extremely uncomfortable for a lot of autistic people and that they shouldn't expect it, and to remember that if someone isn't looking you in the eye, that doesn't mean they're not paying attention or not engaging with you just as strongly. That just means that they communicate differently. Basically, ABA says that some behaviors are right and some are wrong, and the ones that are right aren't just the ones that keep you safe from harm, they're also the ones that make other people like you and fit in with neurotypical society. And if you still aren't convinced that ABA has anything in common with conversion therapy, let me read you a quick paragraph from the Wikipedia page of ABA's founder, Dr. Lovas. Lovas co-authored a study with George Riekers in 1974 where they attempted to modify the behavior of feminine male children through the use of rewards and punishment with the goal of preventing them from becoming adult transsexuals. The subject of the first of these studies, a young boy at the age of 4 at the inception of the experiment, died by suicide as an adult in 2003. The founder also believed in conversion therapy. He also wanted to attempt to eliminate queer people, and he used very similar methods with both. And often, historically, ABA therapy has included abusive treatments as a way to break kids of undesirable behaviors, many of which were just harmless expressions of autism. As WHYY explains, instead of focusing on introspective investigations, behavioral analysis used a system of rewards and punishments to encourage or discourage certain behaviors. Lovas would go to great lengths to stop undesirable behaviors. In the early days, that could mean ignoring, shouting at, slapping, or even delivering small electric shocks to kids. But the approach also included rewards like juice or M&Ms. It was all based on a technique called operant conditioning, which uses reinforcement or punishment to encourage or discourage behaviors. I think part of the issue for parents on Love on the Spectrum, especially people like Abby's mom, is that it's really hard to admit when you're wrong. If you did something because your heart was in the right place at the time and you genuinely want to help your kid be the best version of themselves they can be, and then 20 years later you hear autistic adults calling ABA therapy abusive, it's natural not to want to believe what you're hearing. What parent wants to think they made a decision that hurt their child? I absolutely get why these parents have the inclination to double down and defend their decisions. But the truth is, real autism advocacy comes from listening to lots of autistic people, the whole spectrum, not just your child and not just parents who already agree with you. If you're choosing to remain willfully ignorant about the issues with ABA therapy, that's when it becomes a problem. I'm not mad at any parent for making a decision they thought was best 20 plus years ago, but I am blaming you if you put down other autistic people who critique your decision now in the year of our Lord 2025, because advocating for autistic people is more important than having to be right. These parents could just admit they were wrong, apologize, and devote more time to learning about what newer autism research says. Instead, though, they aren't willing to own up to what they did, and in my opinion, that means they're still centering themselves, still seeing their autistic son or daughter as an extension of them, a reflection of them, rather than an individual person who belongs to a much larger marginalized community. As Amy Grant explained when writing for the Therapist Neurodiversity Collective, when an autistic child's sensory system becomes overwhelmed, the child may first naturally attempt to self-regulate. Perhaps in an effort to self-regulate, the autistic child will attempt to pace back and forth in a pre-calculated pathway in the classroom. The BCBA interprets the behavior of the child seen getting up from their assigned seat and failing to follow the command of stop or come back, not as a communicative attempt in self-advocacy for the need of self-regulation, but rather as a function of her behavior, in this case, escape and non-compliance. The BCBA then determines that intervention is necessary. This decision will significantly escalate the situation, and the result is that the ANS system kicks in, triggering the child's fight, flight, and freeze response. But the BCBA ignores that child's nervous system response because their job is to force compliance of following commands of stop, wait, or come back in order to extinguish the behavior function of escape. The authority figure actively stands in the way of the child's self-regulation attempts and reignites the child's fight, flight, freeze response again and again and again. Meanwhile, the child's body releases adrenaline and cortisol over and over and over until their little body can't handle anymore, and then they go into meltdown. This is why a lot of autistic people advocate against ABA therapy, and I'll admit, When I first had a therapist suggest to me that I was autistic when I was 30 years old, I didn't really know anything about ABA therapy. I'd never had it. I didn't really know what it was. I'd heard it mentioned here and there, but I didn't know about the huge history it had of abusing autistic people and treating our natural behaviors as undesirable unless they were to look and present in a way that neurotypical people approve of. The more I learn about ABA therapy, the more horrified I'd become by it. So I can understand why these parents may not have known. If medical professionals were recommending it to them at the time, of course they were going to give it a try. But medicine evolves, our understanding of autism evolves, and the majority of autistic adults who did go through ABA therapy as children are now speaking up about how it caused PTSD or left them with trauma, and more autism researchers and professionals are discovering that it's not the best way to help an autistic child. So again, just admit that you did the best you could with the information you had at the time. Don't continue insisting that you must have been right 2 decades ago, because there's no way you, the almighty autism parent, could ever be wrong. Just listen to autistic people. Later on in this video, when we review some of the podcast episodes associated with the show, we are going to see a lot of examples of Abby's mom shit-talking other autistic adults who disagree with her parenting methods, even claiming that people like me aren't really autistic, despite sharing a ton of qualities with people like Abby, because we didn't get diagnosed as young children and because we disagree with her. Back to the parents. There are so many moments in this show where these parents overstep their bounds, and not only do they face no consequences, but they're often praised for it, with many fans of the show calling these parents so wonderful, so patient. That's the word I hear most. They're so patient, because autistic people, as we know, are extremely annoying. For my no sarcasm autistics in the audience, that was sarcasm. So let's talk a little bit about Connor's mom, Lise. There are multiple moments in the show where she completely blows past Connor's boundaries, refuses to accept his privacy, and treats his opinions as if they don't matter. And this is just what she's choosing to show us on camera. We learn early on that Connor struggles with changes to his routine, which is very common for autistic people. Connor goes to a speed dating event for the first time, which is a step outside of his usual comfort zone. During the event, Connor needs to take a break, to go outside, to collect himself. He's starting to feel overwhelmed, which, like, they're using a bell to announce partner changes at an autistic speed dating event. That's so weird to me. Whose idea was it to use a bell for that? Obviously, you're going to trigger overstimulation in people. Like, whose idea was that? Anyway, Connor goes outside for a moment to reflect on why he's starting to feel overwhelmed, and he explains to the camera that dating is new for him. He's scared of developing feelings for someone because those feelings are going to be something new. They'll be outside of his usual normal. His normal perspective and way of operating day to day will change, and for someone who relies so much on routines and life staying the same, that is very stressful. Connor concludes that he's going to mark one of the women he meets at the dating event as a yes because he thinks she seems nice and he wants to try something new, even though it's scary for him. This scene clearly shows that Connor is uncomfortable with these changes, but he's willing to try even if it's not easy. So he goes out with the woman he matches with. Her name's Sasha. They get along well, they have a good time, but they end up deciding not to pursue a committed relationship. So Connor decides to call Sasha on the phone and tell her that he doesn't feel like they're going to work out long term. So his mom helps him out, and at first I thought that this scene was very nice. It started off very nicely. Connor and his mom sit in the bedroom together and they rehearse what he's going to say. His mom tries out different reactions that Sasha might have to Connor's breakup announcement. Maybe she'll be okay with it. Maybe she's feeling the same way. Maybe she'll be disappointed. Maybe she'll be angry. Connor's mom practices the different reactions with him as a way to help him feel emotionally prepared, and I thought this was nice. I thought it was great that they were doing that, but then my opinion instantly flipped on Connor's mom. As we've established, this is already uncomfortable for Connor. He's well outside his comfort zone to the point where he was close to a meltdown at the speed dating event. He's very nervous about making this phone call. So he does what any reasonable man about to break up with a woman does and asks his mom for some privacy. His mom agrees. She even says, "I'll give you some privacy," and she leaves the room. But then, when Connor is on the phone, the camera briefly cuts away from him and we see his mom standing in the hallway listening in, literally eavesdropping on her son's phone call to break up with someone. What the fuck? Now, you could make the argument that Connor wasn't really expecting privacy because, after all, he is making this phone call on camera as part of a TV show that he agreed to be filmed for. But regardless, his mom promised him privacy and then she didn't give it to him. She deceived him to his face, and then we were shown that on camera as if it was cute. And this is not the only time that Lise goes behind Connor's back to do what she thinks is best for him without his consent. At the start of season 3, Connor's mom reveals to him that she set him up on a date without his knowledge. Connor is angry with her. He straight up tells her that he's annoyed that she didn't ask his permission before doing this. We've already covered how Connor finds a lot of these experiences uncomfortable and disruptive to his routine, but he's taking it at his own pace. So to have his mom arrange a date for him without his knowledge with a woman he's never met before and hasn't expressed prior interest in, that's a huge crossing of his boundaries. But Connor goes on the date anyway. He concludes that the woman he meets is nice, but she lives in a different state than him, and he's not interested in a long distance relationship, so they end it then and there. If only Connor's mom had talked to him beforehand, maybe he could have told her he doesn't want a long distance relationship, and everyone could have saved some time and stress, but no, we gotta do it for TV. Eventually, Connor ends up meeting Georgie, who is a wonderful match for him. I really do like their relationship. And at the end of season 3, they're talking about renovating a guest house together. Connor's family has a decent amount of money and they have a small guest house on their property. So Connor's now planning to move into the guest house so that he can live independently, but spend time in this transitional period where his family's still there nearby before he goes out and lives on his own farther away. And I think that's a great idea. I've seen people saying that Connor and Georgie renovating the guest house together could be its own like HGTV style spin-off show, and I couldn't agree more. I would watch the shit out of that, and I already have the perfect name for it. Netflix, you owe me big money for this one, okay? I call it Little House on the Spectrum. Now let's transition from talking about how Connor's mom ignores his boundaries and move on to how Abby's mom ignores her boundaries. There's a scene toward the end of season 3 when Abby and David are celebrating their 2-year anniversary, and Abby's mom, Christine, is in the kitchen talking with David's sister. Abby's mom is explaining that Abby's very particular with how she arranges her collectibles. She enjoys collecting toys, plushies, figurines, which, same. Christine says that Abby is so particular about how her stuff is arranged, in fact, that she can't even move things a quarter inch or else Abby will notice, and then everyone laughs at this. Does this make anyone else feel really unsettled? If it doesn't, let me ask you this. Do you make a habit of going into other people's bedrooms and moving their stuff around? The way this is portrayed so casually requires us as the audience to assume that someone going into someone else's room and moving their things around is a normal thing to do. Otherwise, how does that make Abby, like, very particular about her stuff? I'm not organized in the least, and I couldn't give a shit about what shelf things go on, but if someone came into my office without my knowledge and moved things around, I would be weirded the fuck out by that. Because, like, why would you do that? What reason did you have for moving my stuff? To me, that sounds like a power play more than anything. To treat that behavior as normal sends the message, hey, Abby, you may be an adult, but your stuff is still mine. You're still mine. I, your mother, have ownership of you because you are an extension of me and not a separate human being. And the show has small moments like this that seem innocuous to neurotypical viewers, but when you examine what they mean, it gets really creepy really fast. There's nowhere that Abby's mom acts more obnoxious than when she's on podcasts. Sometimes with Abby and sometimes without her, doing interviews and getting extra press for the show. So let's head into our next section, which is going to be a pretty big one. Podcast interviews. We're going to start with the Logan Paul podcast. Yes, Impulsive, the podcast run by a roided-up gym bro who's most famous for filming dead bodies in Japan and putting them in his vlogs for attention, promoting shady energy drinks with KSI and Mr. Beast, two of the biggest scammers on the internet, swindling thousands of dollars from people through faulty cryptocurrency, and publicly spreading transphobic conspiracy theories about female athletes at the Olympics. That's the guy whose podcast they went on. Why? I have no goddamn idea. But don't worry, I'm sure today will be the day that Logan Paul finally decides to act like an empathetic human being. I'm sure this podcast will handle a topic as complex as autism representation in the media with the care and nuance that it deserves. For my no sarcasm autistics out there, that was another one. So some context before we go into this first clip. At the end of season 3 of Love on the Spectrum, Abby sang a song to David as a gift for their 2nd anniversary, like their 2-year anniversary together. Abby has always loved music and singing, and I believe she performs in a musical theater group as a hobby, and I think she might be interested in pursuing a music career one day. So anyway, it was a very nice song. She did a great job. A lot of the lyrics really resonated with the audience, and the song kind of went viral. It was very nice. So Logan Paul asks Abby about some of the lyrics.
I know sometimes I'm in my head, but when I'm with you, I'm in the world instead.
Wow.
Dude,
That's incredible.
everyone watching that was like, what the? I got goosebumps watching. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing.
We all get goosebumps.
Yeah. What in special moments that make you feel.
So this is how Abby often talks. When someone says something, she might respond, well, we all do that sometimes, or I do this thing, but everyone's different. It's habitual for her to relate a specific statement to a global understanding, if that makes sense. So when Logan says he got goosebumps from her song, and Abby says, well, we all get goosebumps. Okay, yeah, that's true. In the background, we can hear Christine, Abby's mom, laughing. Why is she laughing? So here's the thing. Autistic people can absolutely be funny. Many of my videos are hilarious, if I do say so myself. This one's a little angrier, but I can be funny sometimes. My favorite author, Chuck Tingle, is autistic, and he's one of the best comedy writers of this generation. Autistic people can have an excellent sense of humor. But Abby's mom so often does this. When Abby isn't making a joke and isn't saying anything particularly funny, her mom just laughs in the background. It comes across as if she's laughing at Abby. Look at my autistic daughter. The way she constructs sentences and connects thoughts is slightly different than the way a neurotypical person does. Isn't that automatically funny? No, that's fucking weird, Christine. Shut up, your daughter's talking. There's a second host on this podcast, and I think his name is Mike. He's just as bad as Logan Paul most of the time, but I imagine he's got some interesting questions for Abby anyway, right?
Christine, can I ask you a question? I think a lot of people look at being on the spectrum kind of as a disability, and I can understand that obviously and see that, but with these special talents, are there certain roles in the world that you see people on the spectrum being better at than the average person? Like, for example, if I wanted to hire Abby to come, I don't know, count cards with me at the casino, for example. What are some things like that maybe they would be better at than the non-afflicted or I don't know. Sorry,
that's fine. I don't have any offense to how people.
Sorry, I don't know.
No, it's totally cool because it's great you're asking. I mean, that's the main thing. When she was younger, I used to say, these kids with autism, the kind of autism she has, let's clarify that.
Good question, Mike. I mean, we'll ignore that his first thought when interviewing an autistic person is to be like, can they count cards for me? Can I hire them to be Rain Man? And instead we'll focus on what I think is the biggest issue here. Why did he ask it to Christine instead of to Abby? Abby's sitting right there. She's the guest you invited for the podcast. Why didn't you ask her this question? And Christine, why did you answer for her? Why didn't you say, that's a good question, Mike? Abby, what do you think some of your special talents are? And if Abby struggles to think of an answer to that question, then you can use your normal way of accommodating her, help prompt her through it. Why is it treated as normal that Christine would answer for Abby about what her strengths and weaknesses are? You may also have noticed that Christine is really anal about this. Well, the type of autism Abby has, you have to differentiate the types of autism nowadays because of woke. She's not going to give up on this either.
The issue I personally have is that the diagnostic language we used changed in 2013. We used to have something called Asperger's. Asperger's identified a population of people that usually didn't have a speech delay. Like they didn't necessarily need 20 years of speech therapy to really converse and learn pragmatic language. Those Asperger people, many of them are scientists, engineers, right on smart, amazing people that don't really like social skills. It's just not their bag.
That's a terrible explanation of Asperger's. Yes, Christine is right that before the DSM-5 combined the Asperger's diagnosis with the overall autism spectrum diagnosis in 2013 when the new edition came out, changing the previous diagnostic criteria from the DSM-4, yes, previously one of the differences between Asperger's versus a general autism diagnosis had to do with a speech delay. But I love how she's basically like, oh, we used to have Asperger's. There are people who are basically Sheldon from the Big Bang Theory, science and math geniuses who are super socially awkward. That's what Asperger's is. No, it was already way more varied than that, even back then. For example, had I gotten a diagnosis as a child, I probably would have been diagnosed with Asperger's, but I've never had any issues with social skills. Actually, I'm very extroverted and outgoing. I'm terrible at picking up on social cues. I cannot read body language or vibes or nonverbal communication to save my life. I take everything literally. I have no idea how to read the room. I can never tell when people are getting annoyed with me, but none of that causes me anxiety, right? I'm still just as outgoing because, I don't know, I'm a naturally overconfident person to my own detriment. Now, in my case, that could be because I am a conventionally attractive woman, and as a result, I probably just didn't get bullied as much for my social differences, whereas, like, for example, young men who grow up behaving in the similar way I did would be bullied for the exact same behaviors. I can't say for sure if that's the reason. Part of the issue is that women have always been way underrepresented in the autism community, in part because autism goes unnoticed in young girls because they instead get written off as quirky. Fellow autistic women in the comments, question for you guys. Did you ever get told as a teenager and a young young adult that you'd make a really good preschool teacher, but you were like, why? I don't really enjoy spending time with young children. They were like, yeah, but you have the perfect personality to be a really good preschool teacher. In my experience, that's what happens to autistic girls, right? People assume that we'd make really good preschool teachers. So anyway, that's my point with all this. Even among those of us who would have been categorized as Asperger's in the past, there's still so much variation. But no, according to Abby's mom, the #1 autism authority, Asperger's means you're a scientist who prefers to study rather than interact with other people. Got it.
Ben, you got to answer this too, both you guys.
Yeah.
How hard is it to? How funny has it been? I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine how amazing the stuff that comes out of her mouth is.
There's some pretty blunt observations that are made. It's like everything you think is just said. That's kind of how it is. So there's some things that not offensive, but like observant.
All right, here's the thing. I think my blunt observations can be funny too. Here's a blunt observation. Christine, you look too much like the girl boss grifter Mel Robbins. Like, you look exactly like her. It's fucking weird. Anyway, I like to joke about my blunt observations. I like to laugh at myself. That can be funny. Does Abby enjoy joking about her blunt way of speaking and laughing at herself? I'd have no way to know because the host did not direct this question to Abby. They directed it at both her mom and her brother. They directed it at everyone in the room except Abby. Maybe Abby told them ahead of time that she'd be okay with this type of interaction. I have no way to know. But we need to keep in mind that this is what we, the public, get to see. These are the optics that Christine is choosing to show. She is okay with showing the world an example of her talking over her daughter about her daughter. If she and Abby had an agreement ahead of time that she was okay with that, it would be important for them to tell that to us, the audience, because otherwise the representation we're getting seems to suggest that it's normal for parents of autistic people to talk over the autistic person themselves. Now, if Abby's family weren't able as sacks of shit, maybe they would have replied to this question by saying, hey Abby, what do you think about your blunt way of speaking first? And then they could maybe add on their own opinions afterward and overall contribute to the conversation. But don't worry, Christine is ready to talk. Actually, she's ready to lean into another rant about why autism and Asperger's have nothing in common and why people like me don't deserve to have the same label as her daughter.
Comedy's another interesting angle and aspect. Have there been any comedians that have been on the spectrum? I mean, it's like
but the population now, because there's a couple of things. There's autism awareness, social media, TikTok, the show. There's a lot of expansion of understanding, hey, what's going on with these people? Not everyone's a sit down, be quiet, learner from the blackboard. There's all these variations of our neurology that are being identified, which is a great, great thing. But for us, having differences that impact your daily life, we needed interventions and services. Do you know what I mean? So those Asperger people I was mentioning before, which you can't say anymore, which are now part of the same population as her, they have these like level 1, 2, and 3. It's kind of like if you're non-speaking or nonverbal, you're profoundly autistic or level 3. But if you're an engineer and you have internal struggles, you kind of have the same diagnosis, and that's really hard to figure out. So then you say, yeah, I see comedians all the time going, I just found out I was on the spectrum. And yeah, I mean, I knew I was weird as a kid. And there really was something going on for that person. I truly believe that. And I'm so grateful that they have a chance to identify, but it's zero crossover to what she has and what we've done.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack in this one. First of all, Christine, I don't know if you remember the question you were asked, but the question asked to you was, do you know if there are any comedians on the spectrum? Let me answer the actual question real quick. Yeah, there are plenty of comedians on the autism spectrum. My Instagram algorithm regularly shows me their clips. One of the most popular autistic comedians right now is Hannah Gadsby. I've seen a little bit of her stuff. I'm not really a big fan, mainly because her style of comedy just doesn't really resonate with me. I'm not sure why, but there you go. There's an example. I've also been seeing lots of clips online from an autistic comedian named Dan Lamort, who's been getting pretty popular lately, and those are just me naming two that I've personally seen. Also, I looked it up while scripting this video, and apparently multiple sources report that Dan Aykroyd, famous for Saturday Night Live, Ghostbusters, and the Blues Brothers, and like a lot of the great comedies that came out of the 80s, he's also autistic. None of that was hard for me to find. Now, let's unpack the rest of Christine's wild-ass answer. If you're non-speaking, then you're level 3. If you're an engineer, then you're level 1, and you should be called Asperger's. Okay, awesome. Now, by your standards, how would you, Dr. Abby's mom, how would you diagnose a person who is non-speaking but also who works as an engineer? This is such a common misconception about non-speaking autistic people, that they can't communicate at all. Just because someone doesn't talk with their voice doesn't mean they can't write, doesn't mean they can't communicate in sign language or learn other ways of exchanging information. I've known autistic people who don't speak at all, but then on social media they can write long essays about all of their opinions. Remember, autism is a spectrum. Now let's get to the part that really pissed me off, okay? When she says that people who have level 1 autism, or what was previously called Asperger's, have absolutely nothing in common with Abby. Based on what? I have a lot in common with Abby. We both had occupational therapy as kids, for example. We both had various motor skill development delays. We both tend to communicate in memories. We both have really good sharp memories that evoke emotions of the past. We both love collecting toys and figures. We have a maximalist style of interior decorating. We enjoy walking around singing. Now, Abby's a much better singer than I am. I can't sing at all, but I do it anyway as like a vocal stim. We both relate strongly to book and movie characters. We both love animals. Abby has a special interest in the lioness. She states that a lot on the show, that she loves lionesses. I personally like to take a lot of shrooms and then run around naked identifying as a lioness. It might not seem like the same action to you, Christine, but I really do think it comes from the same place. More than anything, though, Abby and I both have a really direct and blunt way of communicating. We both say exactly what we mean. Neither of us have much of a sense of how to imply or infer meanings, and instead we say things directly and expect the same of other people. That's how I've always communicated, and from what Abby's been saying on this interview and others, the same seems to be true for her. What I'm trying to say is that Abby and I have a lot in common. And if those commonalities aren't good enough for you, Christine, then you need to communicate clearer, because autistic people communicate very directly and very literally, and you do not have an autistic friendly way of talking, which is fine. You don't have to. I don't have a neurotypical friendly way of talking. We're all different. But if you don't have an autism friendly way of talking and you don't make an effort to, then you have no place in autism advocacy, Christine.
I want to get a pink lightsaber.
Okay.
If I had one, I'd choose the pink lightsaber.
Okay, cool. What about David? Does he like it as well?
A red lightsaber.
You guys could battle.
Well, I'll do it with his sister Aubrey, because Aubrey's into video games. It's one of David's triplet sisters, and his other sister Allison goes to school for ABA.
Now, Christina's about to start talking about ABA therapy. Abby is just trying to talk about what she enjoys doing with David's sisters for fun, like playing video games, and then when Abby gives an overview of David's sisters and what they do, she mentions that one of them is studying to be an ABA therapist. And instead of letting Abby continue talking about what she's talking about, watch what Christine does instead.
And his other sister Allison goes to school for ABA, Applied Behavior Analysis.
Oh, wow.
Cool. Very cool.
That's a whole controversy now, because that's a therapy that's used for, I say, certain types of autism, but because we have one word, part of the population thinks it's bad and torturous and not cool. And then the other part's like, we're dying over here. We need help for our kids. For us, it worked. Yeah. I don't bash any therapy because everyone's different. Like, try whatever works for you. But on my social media, people have come after me.
Okay, why did you have to jump into Abby's conversation about what she does with David's sisters and make it all about your weird pro-ABA agenda? I love how she says that, one part of the spectrum says that it's torture, and another part says we need help for our kids. It's not part of the spectrum that's saying that. That's the parents of people on the spectrum saying we need help for our kids. The parents aren't their own section of the spectrum. Sure, it's common for autistic people to have autistic parents as well, since it's genetic, but just because someone carries those genes doesn't mean they're always going to be autistic 100% of the time, which is why we see neurotypical parents like Christine who think that their experience counts as part of the autism spectrum. That's the equivalent of people who wave ally flags at the Pride Parade being like, the A stands for ally, right? Sure, you want to support people in this community, but you yourself do not face the struggles of it. Your daughter does, and you want to help her, but you are not her. You are a separate person. Yes, there are some autistic people who do support ABA therapy themselves. I won't say that never happens. In fact, I think Kaylin from season 1 of Love on the Spectrum does use some ABA style techniques in her work as a therapist, but she also does talk a lot on social media about how ABA historically has included a lot of abuse, and she's working really hard to make sure none of her work ever uses those methods. So it's not necessarily a black and white issue. I'm not saying that it's like a clear two sides issue, but for Christine to put herself as part of the spectrum and to say the other side says we need help of our kids, you're not the other side. You're not part of the spectrum at all. Stop pretending that you and Abby are two parts of the same person. You are both individuals, and this insistence on including yourself in every single autism space is creepy. After all of that weird Asperger's separatism and work to drive wedges within the autism community, Christine has the audacity to say this.
It is my mission to try to get everyone to work together.
If that's really your goal, then you need to stop telling autistic people that we're not autistic enough. You need to listen to autistic people. If your goal is truly for everyone to work together, then you need to take autistic people's opinions seriously. But that's not her goal. It's not her goal for everyone to work together. It's only her goal to work together if the other people already agree with her. She's not willing to actually change her opinions or perspectives to work with other people. Christine could easily sit down with autistic parents of autistic kids, as in parents who also have autism themselves, and then have a conversation about where these differences in opinions come from, what the varying experiences are, where they might disagree with her. Those people would be able to provide the parenting perspective as well. Why doesn't she do this? The answer is that Christine isn't actually interested in supporting autistic people. She's interested in speaking for autistic people. She's interested in being a savior. Watch this.
When I get hurt, I'd feel a little bit like anger from inside out.
When was the last time you felt angry?
I'm not sure if I don't win a game and Candy Crush, like I can get all my emotions in Inside Out, like sadness, anger. Think about the Inside Out emotions.
Yep.
Or if I'm seeing a horror movie or if I feel nauseous, I'm like, disgust. She's green.
What about the second one? Anxiety showed up.
Like when the bus would run late, I'd feel like anxiety.
Yeah.
Christine, do you notice that she has a good firm grasp on emotionality?
Now she does.
Yeah.
It's a really weird day when Logan Paul is the person in the room who's right. So Abby's talking about the movie Inside Out, which I loved. I got a plushie of anger because at the time that the movie came out, I was working on my own handle on my anger and getting it under control. And here Logan Paul is doing something new. He's trying something brand new for the first time in his life. He's setting a good example. Logan listens to Abby while she talks about the movie she likes. He listens to her while she relates the characters to her own emotions. He then asks follow-up questions to her, even relating his own experiences. This is legitimately what a good interview looks like. I didn't have complimenting Logan Paul on my 2025 bingo card, but it's been a weird year, okay? Meanwhile, the other host has to completely ruin this moment by bringing the attention back to Abby's mom. He then asks Christine, do you think Abby has a good grasp on emotionality? I don't know, Mike. Abby was only just talking in depth about her emotions and how she feels and identifies them. I'd say that, yeah, no shit, she has a good grasp on her emotions because she's showing you that skill right now. And it's possible that Mike doesn't know the movie Inside Out or didn't know what Abby was explaining, but why not ask her the follow-up question? Why interrupt Abby's own story to ask her mom about Abby's emotions? Let the woman talk about her own emotions, which she was literally in the middle of doing when you asked this. But as annoying as I find Abby's mom, she's actually not my least favorite of the Love on the Spectrum parents. Nothing could prepare me for the ableist hell of Tanner's family. So let's watch Tanner family in action on another Bottom of the Barrel podcast, which is honestly on par with Logan Paul's. It's that bad. The Unplanned podcast is hosted by Matt and Abby, two extremely controversial influencers who I believe got in trouble for leaving their kids unattended on a cruise ship. Like their baby to toddler age kids. They put baby monitors in the cruise ship cabin and then went and partied on the ship, leaving their literal babies unattended on a cruise ship. Basically, they're known to the public for being extremely selfish parents who care way more about their own online fame than they do about raising their kids. I can see why Tanner's mom wanted to be on this podcast, I'll say that. So these are the people who have decided to host Tanner from Love on the Spectrum for a podcast interview. I'm sure they're going to be extremely considerate, nuanced, and sympathetic to autistic people, right? The first thing we learned during this interview is that Tanner never actually applied to be on Love on the Spectrum. Remember, Tanner has never been looking for a relationship. The first thing we get in this podcast interview is confirmation that Tanner's mom, Nikki, applied to the show for him because she liked the show.
I had watched the show. I'd watched the Australian version and the first US season. Obviously, anything autism I'm drawn to. And so I'd watched it and I thought, wow, that's really thoughtful, really well done. I really liked the way Ken was portraying people and the stories he was telling. I thought, this is well done. And I just randomly saw Northern Pictures had posted an Instagram ad saying we're going to be in the Southeast United States looking for possible candidates for season 2. In the US, we'll be in Greenville, South Carolina, which is right, right where he was, Charlotte, Atlanta. And I was just sitting at the kitchen table, and of course, I think he's precious. So, and I
think he's the cutest.
I think he's the cutest. And I was like, I'm just gonna send his picture. And it was like a brief bio. I mean, like very short. And we had a call that night. And they said, we really, really like his picture. We'd love to talk to you. And one thing led to another. So We had never talked about being on TV.
No.
When was Tanner involved in the application process? Tanner, who doesn't want a relationship, didn't even seem to care about the show one way or another, but Nikki saw a golden opportunity, so she applied for him.
I work at the Sherp's Hotel. I told you, hey, one of our friends from work, his name's Miss Donna, and one thing on my bucket list is go see Bruno Mars and meet him in person with Miss Donna.
Yeah. I do want to talk about your work a little bit.
Yeah.
You work pretty hard at that hotel, don't you? What
do.
are some of your duties at the hotel?
I clean the bathrooms, I vacuum the blue mats, I vacuum the blue mat up on the floor that goes out to the valley, I vacuum the carpet on the furniture, I vacuum the carpet under the welcome desk, and I clean the third floor bathrooms, I put more toilet papers and more paper towels in the bathrooms when they need more.
Wow.
Hey, can I both tell you my friend's names there?
Yes.
So our boss, Miss Katrina, just retired.
This is another example of neurotypical people treating autistic people as if everything they say is funny just because it's worded different or sounds different than how they might say it. Yes, autistic people can be funny. Just a few minutes ago, I even listed some autistic comedians. Isn't it funny how Abby's mom managed to think every serious thing Abby said was hilarious but couldn't name a single autistic comedian? Cool, right? Anyway, why is everyone in this room laughing? Because Tanner wants to talk about his friends at work. Also, where did Tanner get the idea that he has to constantly ask for permission to talk about what he wants to talk about? Was it maybe in the 30 to 40 hours of ABA his mom subjected him to as a child? I don't know, probably. I've never seen anyone ask other people for permission to talk as much as I see Tanner do it. Tanner is the subject of this podcast interview. He is the person that the audience is interested in. So if he's talking about his work cleaning hotels and he wants to talk about his coworkers, why does he feel the need to ask if that's okay? Of course it's okay. And yeah, if he doesn't, he clearly doesn't inherently know that, but the fact that he doesn't know that kind of concerns me. I guess wanting to talk about your coworkers during a conversation about your job is hilarious and unexpected because autistic people talking is funny because we're so weird and different.
Tell Miss Abby, like, what were some of the things that were harder when you were younger because of your autism?
I had trouble paying attention in school some.
Okay, who the fuck is Miss Abby? Who's Miss Abby, Nikki? Who is Miss Abby? The millennial beige mom influencer sitting across from you? That's Miss Abby? We need to address her as Miss Abby because this podcast interview is a formal setting where we need titles and honorifics? Well, if that's the case, then why hasn't Nikki herself addressed Matt and Abby as Mr. Matt and Miss Abby at all yet? Why does she only refer to her as Miss Abby when she's talking to Tanner about her? In English, we don't use honorifics by default the way some Eastern languages like Japanese, for example, do, but we do sometimes retain titles like this for the sake of formality. Words like Mr., Miss, things like that. Normally, when we're referring to someone with this type of title, it's to indicate that we view them as being in a position of authority. That's why people say things like Mr. President, or they call their doctors Dr. Smith or whoever. If you are deferring to that person as the authority in that situation. The most common place we see this is with children and their teachers. Miss Abby is the name you might expect your 4-year-old to call their preschool teacher, for example. So why does Nikki say Miss Abby to Tanner as if it's natural for him to think of these podcast hosts as Mr. and Miss? Tanner is not a child with a teacher. He's not an employee of a government official with a much higher rank than him. He's not in the military where he's expected to use specific titles for his superiors. So no, the answer must be that Nikki views Abby, the podcast host, as an authoritative figure to Tanner in some way. But why does she only use this Mr. and Miss business when talking to Tanner? Why doesn't Nikki address Abby as Miss Abby herself? If Nikki views podcast hosts as authority figures, which is already an unhinged thing to do, why doesn't she see them as authority figures to herself as well? Why just to Tanner? The only conclusion I can come to after running this social interaction through my already overly complicated autism flowchart is that Tanner's mom, Nikki, views neurotypical people as naturally existing in a position of authority over autistic people. That's why when she talks to her autistic son, she refers to neurotypical people around them with terms of authority. And this is pretty consistent in the way Nikki talks throughout this interview and others that we will see in a minute. When she talks about the friends Tanner has made on the show, like Connor, she calls him Connor, not Mr. Connor. When Tanner talks about his fellow disabled roommates, he calls them by their names. He doesn't put Mr. in front of them. But when Tanner talks about other people he knows, like bosses, teachers, etc., he calls them Mr. or Miss. nice. In Tanner's household, title equals respect seems to be a common belief. Tanner calls people sir and ma'am, which is fine. He's from South Carolina, and that's a way of speaking that's still fairly common in the American South. But it's this specific interaction that gives me pause. This interaction where Nikki refers to a fellow adult as Miss when she's addressing Tanner. That indicates that she views neurotypical people as natural figures of authority over autistic people, and if that's what her belief really is, if that's where it really comes from, I'm gonna say it, that is a Nazi belief. Now, if you're not convinced that's what's going on here, that's okay. We are going to look at another example of this later in a different podcast. This is a pattern of behavior, which is what makes it concerning for me.
I have to brag on Midge because I could not have ordered up or dreamed up a better younger sister. And I think the relationship is even more special because she's the younger sibling. And there's just a real maternal but also friendly love that's just very self-sacrificing.
Don't say that Tanner's younger sister has a maternal relationship with him. That's fucking weird. And it kind of ties in well with what we just discussed, doesn't it? If Nikki views Midge, Tanner's younger sister, as maternal towards him, despite being younger, that means she views autistic people as naturally in the childlike and less authoritative role when compared to neurotypical people. Nikki seems to view the world as a natural social hierarchy, with autistic people maintaining a permanent role of lower status with fewer rights, and she displays this in her casual way of talking as if this belief is completely normalized for her.
I've heard it said that siblings of people with disabilities are like the fiercest protectors.
The best.
Oh yeah,
Like, do you
it's
relate
so
to that?
crazy, like how like maternal instincts are just like even like protective things like come in just naturally.
Do I even need to comment on that? Midge seems like a nice girl, but she really needs to learn about disability rights. Midge, there's still time for you, okay? You don't have to turn into Nikki. You can start viewing Tanner as an equal any day now. The best time to start is years ago. The second best time is now. You've got this, girl. I believe in you.
Clemson Life, did they live on their own within that program?
Tanner, tell them when you go to Clemson Life, when you're a new student, where do you live the first 2 years?
Douthit.
And what is Douthit?
It's a building, right?
Well, it's an apartment dorm.
It's an apartment dorm.
It's an apartment dorm. And who do you have that lives with you as a Clemson Life student the first 2 years?
An ILA.
Tell them what an ILA is.
It stands for Independent Living Assistant.
Yeah.
No
Clemson
way.
has a unbelievably just incredible framework. The kids are accepted into the program. They take 50 kids and a mix of diagnoses: autism, Down syndrome, Williams syndrome, all different things. They live with an independent living assistant. They're helping with cleanliness, routines, managing your calendar, getting to where you need to go, navigating campus, managing your money, cooking, all those things, just the dailies of life. That's what the independent living assistant does. So the first 2 years of Clemson Life are really about learning to manage your life and live independently. The second 2 years, you move into a different apartment, but you no longer have an ILA, and it's more focused on job training. And you have job coaches.
This is the part where I'm going to give some credit where it's due. Nikki did make one good decision when raising Tanner, and that was to enroll him in the Clemson Life program. I didn't know much about this program before I watched this show, but I looked it up, and it seems to be a program for disabled college students at Clemson to learn life skills to live on their own for the first time, which actually sounds like it would be helpful to pretty much all college students, but even more so for students whose disabilities cause them to struggle with things like executive dysfunction, which is very common for neurodivergent people. In my research about the Clemson Life program, I couldn't find anything bad about it, which doesn't mean there aren't any issues, so if anyone knows anything, feel free to talk to me in the comments below. But from everything I could find about the program, it does seem to be legitimately helpful, and it eases people into practicing life skills that they need, but might be more difficult to execute if you have a certain disability getting in the way. So 1 point to Nikki for that one. Good job. That actually does seem like a great program, and I am glad that she's promoting it and promoting pathways for autistic people to, learn life skills to eventually live on their own. I think that's awesome.
Tell them some of your goals. What are some of your goals for the next few years?
So, on one day in July this summer, I'm planning on going to Six Flags with Miss Donna, her husband Mr. Choi, and their grandsons, Ethan, Worth, and Liam. And I'm planning on going to Disney World with Miss Donna the summer on 28. And I'm planning on me and my mom Mitch going to South Africa the summer on 30. And I'm planning on going to Australia with Cal the summer on 31. I told you I'm planning on us going to Hawaii the summer on 34. And my last future plan is to move back home to St. Matthews while I'm 44.
We got it all planned out.
You've got a really good memory.
Yeah,
I do have a really good memory.
He does.
we got the next 15 years all planned
out.
Okay, two things here. One, why is everyone laughing? Like, legitimately, I'm not being snarky here. I legitimately don't know what the joke is, and I don't know if I'm missing it. And two, Tanner continues to call people by Mr. and Miss, but his fellow disabled friends and roommates and coworkers, he just calls by their first names. I'm just concerned. I'm concerned that seems normal in this family.
And did they let you see the show before it aired, or was it
Not
your first time seeing
We
it?
don't see anything until when the public sees it.
Yep. Really?
Which is quite nerve-wracking.
That is very nerve-wracking.
And we don't see him like they pick you up for your date, and we sometimes knew like where they were gonna go.
Yeah, I'm like, we knew the location,
but we didn't know like who they were gonna take.
And you don't
on
know
a
who
date
their
with.
date is.
Where like timing, they just take
no,
him
and
they're
they the crew takes him and they go to the date site, and like they filmed him in his apartment, and sometimes we were
like I helped him get ready
Midge
for
was
one date,
in,
and then
Midge
I was
was
like,
in a
okay,
good
love
bit
you,
of it.
bye.
What? They didn't let you follow him on his dates? They didn't let you stalk your adult son while he went on dates with potential romantic partners? They didn't let you get involved in your son's potential sexual affairs? I'm shocked. I'm gobsmacked. That's sarcasm.
Do you have an age picked for when you'd like to have a girlfriend or a wife?
No.
You don't?
No, I don't.
No, play with that one.
You just whenever it happens, it happens.
Just whenever it happens, it happens. That's fun.
That's a good way to think about it.
Yep.
That is a good way to.
It's hard to pick an age for that because it kind of just depends when the right person comes for you.
Yeah.
Is that something you still want?
So, is what something else I want?
A girlfriend?
What can I say? I'm too busy thinking about getting married.
You too busy right now?
Too busy to think about it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
fine. Hey, but why'd you ask me that? That makes me nervous.
Oh, that's okay, buddy.
Yeah, I just want to make sure. But no one's making me get married, right?
No, you don't have to get married.
But it kind of upsets me when people ask me that. I hate to tell you this, but it helps.
It's okay. Tell the truth. Tell
Because
the truth.
I don't want to get married. It's a lot of work. I'm sorry.
There it is. That is all the proof we need that Nikki is the absolute worst parent on the show. Tanner is uncomfortable talking about dating, relationships, and marriage. He doesn't want a relationship, and he has no intention of ever getting married. He just said so right there. Some audience members have wondered if Tanner might be asexual or aromantic or on the ace spectrum in some way. He might not. We have no way to know what his specific sexual orientation is, but it is possible, and it's a possibility that seems like his family has never considered. And if he's living in a conservative family in South Carolina, I doubt it's a possibility that Tanner has ever even been introduced to for himself. Maybe that's not even the case. Maybe Tanner is a straight man who just finds dating uncomfortable for whatever reason. That is possible too, and that's also okay. But in that case, it's still weird and overbearing for Tanner's mom to put him on a dating reality show when he has no interest in relationships.
You seem very joyful.
That's right, I am very joyful.
Midge, I wanted to ask you if, like, ever growing up with your brother like Tanner, did you ever have a hard time explaining if, like, friends came to the house, or was there ever an instance where you felt like you needed to let people know what your brother was like before they came over?
I'm trying to think. Like, growing up in a small town, a lot of people already knew him and stuff, and our family really, like, we kind of just roll with it. I'm like, this is just how life is, and like sometimes things work a little bit differently with someone who's has a disability, but like we've always been good about. We just kind of laugh and keep rolling.
When you told me that some gorillas can squeeze men's arms when they feel threatened by them, hey, in the chat back King Kong, but when one of the men, Mr. Hayes, was standing by the cave and when he was shooting his machine gun, he got out his other gun, and when King Kong was running out and roaring, he grabbed Mr. Hayes and he picked him up and he squeezed him.
What a weird and uncomfortable moment. Tanner, the guest of the podcast, the one they invited to here to talk to him, that Tanner, he's trying to talk about gorillas, and I love gorillas, so I wanted to hear what the man had to say about gorillas. But Abby, or Miss Abby, as I think Miss Nikki thinks I should call her since I'm autistic and therefore always in a position of inferiority to neurotypical people, Miss Abby wants to know if Midge needed to tell her friends ahead of meeting Tanner how her brother was. Oh, sorry, I meant Miss Midge. I'm just too exhausted to even begin unpacking that, so I'll just let Miss Abby continue.
Tanner, would it be true to say that you're more looking for friends than looking for love?
Yeah.
That's good. I think it's good to know that now. Like, you've started the journey, you tried it, and maybe it's not timing. The timing isn't right.
That's right, yeah.
And I think see, Tanner, do you feel you just said it?
Yeah, Abby, yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
There you go.
Good job.
Matt, what's your favorite food?
Oh, probably shrimp tacos.
Iconic Tanner. He's just like, yeah, I'm looking for friends and not a relationship. Anyway, can we go back to talking about food? Now, if it seemed at all like I was overreacting to anything during this podcast, then I want you guys to see this next bit, because Tanner and Miss Nikki are about to go on another podcast, this time alongside Connor and his mom, Miss Lease. I will now refer to all the neurotypical people with honorifics until it makes all of you watching uncomfortable, because I want you to feel uncomfortable, Miss Nikki. This podcast is a meathead gym bro podcast, the likes of which I haven't seen since Joe Rogan used to do interviews with interesting authors back in the pre-COVID era. Next, we will be watching the Lift Lab podcast. Alright, it's a new day. We're still filming because this is a long video. The Lift Lab is a podcast hosted by another roided up gym bro named Callum, or as I'll be calling him, Mr. Callum, at least for as long as I'm gonna keep this stupid bit up. I'm not sure why beefy, disrespectful gym bro podcasts want to talk about love on the spectrum, but that's life on the internet, I guess. Let's get into it.
All right. Okay, which animal, Tanner, would you like to save the most next? If you could save another animal.
Yeah, if you could save another one, what do you want to save next?
A gorilla. I've never seen a gorilla before.
A gorilla would be so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, tell them what gorilla you got. Tell Mr. Callum what gorilla you got to meet in person.
I got to meet this gorilla in person named Patrick at the Columbia Zoo.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
There it is. There's the Mr. Callum I was waiting for. I can't keep this bit up anymore. I'm not going to keep doing it. No more Mr. Callum. No more Miss Nikki. I'm disgusted every time I hear Nikki refer to a neurotypical person as Mr. or Miss, but only when she's speaking to an autistic person about them.
The three things we talk about in the Lift Lab is fitness, like lifting people up in fitness, spiritual, like and mental, right? And
Love it.
you know, I think the moms, you guys have gone through a lot too, right? With the boy, or they're not young, these
Young
men, right?
Men
and
now, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, but raising them.
Yeah, the neurotypical people here have really gone through a lot. They deserve a medal. At least the host corrects himself to not calling them boys and calling them men, which they are. You're talking to two grown-ass men. Act like it.
With at least the way, and I feel like I can say Connor too,
Yes.
but definitely the way Tanner presents, he has extremely high emotional intelligence. Tanner's one of the most spiritually connected people. I think he can read my energy, and I feel like he's the mere reflection of how I'm acting. So if I'm not acting right,
Right.
I see it. And I feel like what people need to understand is that because it is a communication disorder and maybe a social awareness disorder, but the emotional intelligence is there. So in having like sympathy for people or just being more understanding, imagine if you're feeling all these big feelings, but you don't quite have the skills, or it is harder for you to understand how to communicate it effectively,
Right.
and how to connect to another person and really let them know how you're feeling.
Right.
What a tough place to be.
I don't get this. Autistic people are smart, but they can't communicate effectively. Who decides what it means for something to be effective? Autistic people communicate with each other very effectively. Who's ever seen those memes that are like autism to autism communication? I love those. In fact, most of us think that neurotypical people are the ones who don't communicate effectively because they often cloud their words in vibes and energy and body language and tone and social cues, whereas a lot of autistic people like myself just say what we mean. To us, that is effective communication. I think every cast member of the show communicates very effectively. I can understand them. Maybe not every neurotypical person can, or maybe some non-autistic people have trouble understanding them, but that doesn't mean that the autistic communication is objectively ineffective. It means that it's different. That's like saying that speaking a different language from someone else is a disorder or is ineffective.
I didn't realize how many people are out there kind of empty,
Right.
and kind of sad and just like longing for that. And people will come up to him and I can tell, like, literally just a high five, a hug, and it makes their year. And
Yeah.
I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
It makes us then in turn genuinely appreciate what we have,
Right.
and see the magic in him, and
Yeah.
like that this is genuinely exactly the way he was created to be. God had a purpose. It took us a long time to find it.
Amen.
But here it is, and this is why. It's the why.
Wait, hold up. You didn't notice that your son was fine the way he is until people started recognizing him in public? You didn't appreciate Tanner for who he is until you noticed that he was getting famous from his autism? Until he was an asset to you? If you think I'm being too harsh on Nikki here, don't worry. She's about to double down and make it worse.
You spend I did, a decade questioning, frustrated, sad, angry, a lot of loss. And just like, how am I ever going to make this good?
Yeah.
And I so wish, if I could tell a younger mom anything, I would say just take a deep breath. I know it's hard. I know it sucks. But just take a deep breath. There is going to be light at the end of the tunnel. And there is a reason somebody is going to be fundamentally changed
by this special child.
Say it with me, everyone. Autistic people do not exist to serve as inspiration porn to neurotypical people. Autistic people are our own individual beings with our own independent lives. Imagine being Tanner in this situation. You're already living in a state of high anxiety because you've spent your entire childhood being taught that your natural state of behavior is off-putting and wrong, and as a result, you feel the need to constantly ask people around you for approval just to talk about what you want or answer a question that was asked to you just because you're worried that someone might disagree with you and you don't know if that's allowed. You're always asking if you're making your face look right because you were indoctrinated from toddlerhood to believe in the teachings of a therapy that says that your behavior is wrong, rather than neurotypical judgments of your behavior are wrong. And now that you've gained this big following of people who like you just the way you are, you go on a podcast where your mom talks about how raising you was hard and it sucked, and how she'd tell other autism moms that, yeah, it is really hard to raise an autistic kid and it sucks, but one day it'll pay off. She says that right in front of you. Again, I'm not gonna tell Tanner how to feel. He's entitled to his own emotions, whatever they may be. If he's okay with his mom saying things like that, that's his choice. I have nothing to do with that, but part of me wonders if he's been pressured to so often defer to neurotypical people's opinions and always let them take the lead, and that it just now feels normal to let his mom publicly disparage him like this. Whether or not Tanner himself personally approves, I found it hurtful to watch. And lots of other autistic viewers whose parents may have said the same things, that raising them sucked, it was difficult. I can easily see them being just as hurt by that too.
I was single mom with these 4 children by myself for 5 years.
Wow.
And my Connor's dad and
Wow.
I think autism puts a strain on a marriage.
Yeah.
And
what is this, a 2000s Autism Speaks commercial? Autism will destroy your marriage. What? If you're worried that having a child with autism could destroy your marriage, then I'll say it. You're not ready to have children. So I was not a fan of this podcast. Surprise. But if after this you're still not convinced that some of these parents are exploiting their disabled loved ones for their own martyr-style online following, then get ready, because next we have the Talk to Me Sis podcast. The Talk to Me Sis podcast is different from all the ones we've covered so far because this one was actually created by Connor's mom, Lise, and Tanner's mom, Nikki. That's right, Nikki and Lise have their own podcast together with a following that they would never have without Connor or Tanner. But savvy, you might be thinking, just because they have a podcast doesn't mean they're being exploitative. Maybe Love on the Spectrum was just how these two women met each other, and they decided independently of their sons to start their own podcast about a shared interest that they have. And if that were the case, yeah, I'd agree, there'd be no problem with that. But that's not the case here, because every damn episode of this show is about, guess what? Autism. And let's guess, okay? How many autistic people do you think are featured in each episode? How many autistic people show up as guests on this podcast to share their own experiences? If you guessed that in the majority of episodes the answer is 0, you'd be right. On this show, Nikki and Lise talk about autism from their perspective as the parents of autistic people, and then they invite other autism parents onto the show to share their experiences as autism parents rather than inviting autistic guests. Like, think of how much better this show could be if it were like 2 autism moms, and in every episode they invited an autistic adult onto the show, and they had conversations about each of their individual perspectives about either growing up with autism or raising someone with autism, and they could share their differing perspectives, come to mutual understandings. Like, wouldn't that be such a better show? Anyway, today we are going to look at one particular episode of this show because in my opinion, it's the most egregious, and that is, of course, because their guest of honor on the episode is who other than Abby's mom, Christine. We've got my 3 sleep paralysis demons all lined up in a row to tell me that the A in autism stands for ally. Who's ready for some anti-vaxxer shit?
I was pregnant a year after when Abby turned 1. And so then he was born, and then she was diagnosed after he was born, after Ben was born. So, yeah. So I would not have had a second child. I would have been too scared.
I don't even know what to say to that. I'm just going to leave that there. I don't even know what to say to that kind of thing at this point.
So when she was born, they whisked her away, and they would have never tried to deliver a baby like that without a C-section. So there was, I wouldn't say there was complications, but I guess there sort of were. So they put her on antibiotics, and a side effect of those antibiotics is hearing loss. But of course, they didn't tell me that. You know, you do ask questions because you just wonder, with what happened.
And one thing that has just blown my mind, and I truly don't care, but since we're going there, we're going to go there. I have been ripped on hugely for saying in episode 2 that Tanner's symptoms came on after his 2-year-old vaccinations. I did not say ever, I have never said that that's why he has autism, but they did. You know, and I, like you said, I will always wonder. I don't understand how any thinking person can't wonder about, you know, the things and the timeline and the way things present and the way things happen. I'm a former nurse. You can't tell me not to wonder.
I love how they keep saying things like, you have to wonder. You just have to wonder. No, actually, I don't have to wonder. I have never once wondered if my autism was caused by vaccines or antibiotics or anything like that, because I know that it wasn't. It's easy not to wonder about things when you already know the answer. I also never wonder if the earth is flat. Well, it feels flat. When I walk on the ground feels flat, so sometimes you just have to wonder. No, actually, you really don't. When you know something is a fact, you don't have to wonder about it anymore. That's the beauty of knowledge. Vaccines have never caused autism. Children are often physically ready to receive vaccines around the same times that their bodies have reached a developmental stage where signs of autism would also start showing. It's just like a coincidence of timing. And yes, this is known as a fact, beyond any shadow of a doubt. You do not have to wonder. There has never been any proof that vaccines cause autism. Like I said before, with fewer vaccines, we probably would see less autism in the world solely because more kids would die of preventable diseases before becoming old enough to be diagnosed with autism. But even if they lived until adulthood with no vaccines at all, if they were autistic, they would still be autistic. Those things are unrelated. Autism is there before birth 100% of the time. Hope that clears some things up.
Because we have one phrase, autism spectrum, and we put everyone on it. And this is causing hatred, confusing, bullying, anger, because everyone is hurting. From the lowest low support needs person who has struggled in a real way their whole life and was able to get by, but the inside struggles, I can only imagine how horrible that was, to the person and the caregiver who is 24-hour, 24/7 care. And I have met and spent time with both populations. One of the things about when I try to talk about this is to say, because Abby went to an autism school, because Abby had 22 years of therapies, I have met every type, kind, level, high, low, whatever you want to call it. And I've embraced them and I've tried to just learn what is their story. And when you get mad at someone else's story, someone else's circumstances, you are wasting your life.
I think Abby's mom might be allergic to listening to autistic people. Christine, stop talking for a second and listen. Nobody is mad at your story. Nobody is mad at you for sharing your own experiences. We're mad at you for lending credence to conspiracy theories like vaccines or antibiotics causing autism. You're using a huge platform that you gained from a Netflix show that wasn't even about you to spread these harmful talking points. And these are some of the most dangerous conspiracy theories that exist in the world right now. Anti-medicine beliefs lead to fatal disease outbreaks. Your rhetoric actively kills people. That's why I'm mad at you, not because you're sharing your story. Hope that clears some things up.
When our ego comes in and tells us we're right, it's why we get righteous and we cause negativity in our own lives. But then through that, there was somebody had this book, and it's a book, and it's called Loving What Is. That's the name of the book. Loving What Is. And it's like a self-help book about, I guess, how to embrace your circumstances. Okay, I never read the book. I only read the title of the book. When I saw that title, that book, it was like my epiphany moment.
I love that Abby's mom is like, this book changed my life. I've never actually read it, though. Somehow I'm not surprised. That says a lot about what's going on here.
I love that you're being so raw and honest, because as moms who have lived through something like this, it's okay that I felt the exact same way. And so much of it was like, my own insecurities and pushing it back on myself. Like, did I do something to cause this? Is this somehow, like you said, like almost like a punishment for something I'm not remembering? What did I do to bring this on him? And it's a normal human reaction.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people that don't live, again, you don't know my story. You haven't lived in my shoes. Why waste your energy being mad at a story you don't know of?
Yes.
That's what you're doing. What a waste of your energy. Go do something with the energy that you have.
Say it with me, everyone. Autism moms, this is not about you. You are not the main character of the universe. Oh my god. First, let's talk about Nikki framing having an autistic child as a punishment or something she's lived through. Raising kids is hard, okay? That's a fact. That's why I'm not planning to do it. I don't have any kids. But it's kind of shit that you don't talk about your neurotypical children that way. It's never like, oh my god, I lived through raising my neurotypical child. I had to wipe her ass when she was a baby. And wiping other people's buttholes is gross. I had to take her to the doctor. I had to get her checkups with a pediatrician, and health insurance is expensive in America. Aren't all these struggles of raising children a punishment? She only says things like that about her one autistic son. That child was difficult. Every part of parenting is difficult. If you're not ready to parent a disabled person, don't have kids. Also, Christine, just because I haven't lived your specific life doesn't mean I'm not allowed to have an opinion about how you talk about neurodivergence publicly. You have a big audience for this specific topic, and you are choosing to spread misinformation and publicly characterize autistic people in ways that only serve to sow division throughout this community. I'm allowed to have an opinion on that.
You want so much for your child, and you don't, we want to keep our kids comfortable, safe, and not in pain. And I just remember the absolute fear of what is his life going to be.
Yeah.
And it's
Abby,
tough.
Abby, I'm in the middle of a call right now.
Hey,
Okay.
Abby.
Thanks. Sorry, she's in the other room.
Hi, Abby. So anyway, I don't know.
I wonder why Christine doesn't invite Abby into the discussion here. How surreal does that have to be? To be Abby in this situation, calling for your mom, being like, hey mom, can you come here and help me for a second? Only for your mom to be like, I'm on a call. Abby, she's on a call talking about you. She's currently ignoring you to talk about you behind your back to thousands of people. That's fucking surreal. I feel like I'm living in a piece of absurdist literature watching this. So those are the public appearances that these parents have been making as a result of this show. But as long as the show's audience is either autistic themselves or has a good understanding of how autism works, this shouldn't have that big of an impact, right? It shouldn't matter. Well, let's take a look at the next piece of the puzzle. No autism speaks intended there. Let's look at the next piece. Audience reception. The audience reception to this show has just been all over the goddamn place. I saw some awesome things like fellow autistic people saying that this show helped them feel seen, or even undiagnosed autistic adults saying that this show helped them realize that they themselves might be autistic and start looking into resources that might help them. So on one side of the aisle, we can see that this show did have a positive impact on a lot of people, and that's great. But it's the neurotypical viewers that I'm kind of worried about. Autistic viewers and viewers with other neurodivergences can often more easily understand and relate to the cast of the show because, well, we have similar life experiences. We already have that background knowledge of what it feels like to have a brain that functions differently from the norm. But for people who don't have any disabilities, who don't already know what kinds of feelings those people might be experiencing, this show actually doesn't do that much to help educate people. In fact, even subconsciously, it often ends up reinforcing stereotypes and preconceived notions that many neurotypical people have, and then that feeds into furthering ableist mindsets. To show you an example of what I mean, let's take a look at some of the comments about this show that I read on the Love on the Spectrum subreddit. We'll start with a post that shook me to my core. If you follow me on Instagram, you've already seen this, but if you don't, ooh, get ready, get ready. Why do adults with autism have childlike special interests? Just binged the whole season and really enjoyed it. I have a question, and I'm sorry if it comes off as mean. I'm just trying to understand. I notice most of the people on the spectrum have special interests, some border on obsessions, that are very childlike. 28-year-olds still playing with American Girl dolls and fantasizes about being a Disney princess, trains, dinosaurs, cartoons, anime, etc. First of all, I didn't even script this part, but can we talk about how a minute ago we had autism mom saying that autistic people communicate ineffectively, and over here this person is saying fantasizes about being a Disney princess, trains, dinosaurs. Are they enjoying playing with trains and dinosaurs, or are they fantasizing about being a Disney princess and also fantasizing about being a train and fantasizing about being a dinosaur? Like, your syntax makes no sense. You're the one who can't communicate effectively. Holy shit. Does everyone on the spectrum have these special interests? It makes me uncomfortable sometimes to watch them play so childlike, then talk about having sex and relationships. Oh no, not adults enjoying things. Whoever wrote this post would be horrified to learn that my parents went on their honeymoon to Disney World. While they were there, they probably had sex because it was their honeymoon. Isn't that gross? to have sex right after enjoying Disney things? Doesn't that disgust you? That was more sarcasm, okay? Now, I can't read this poster's mind, but I imagine that my story about my parents' honeymoon wouldn't bother them in the same way. No, it's only a problem when autistic people do it. Has this person never heard of Disney adults? That's like half of Instagram. And I say this as a person who both plays with American Girl dolls daily and has a lot of sex. How are those things related? Do you think that adults don't play? Have you ever heard of a video game, or board games, or RPGs, or recreational sports leagues? Adults play all the fucking time. It's not my fault that you're boring. Or again, is it only a problem when autistic people do it? Especially since they brought up anime. Oh no. No one who likes anime could possibly be mature enough for sex. Is this person unaware that in Japan there is an entire adult animation industry, and animation being considered childlike is a primarily Western ideal? How can directors like Miyazaki possibly deal with tough issues like the destruction left to Earth in the wake of World War II when his movies are animated? The idea that animation, especially anime, is for children is blowing my fucking mind. Who wants to be the first person to tell this poster what hentai is? Like, seriously, how is this person posting on the internet in 2025 without ever having heard the phrase anime titties? I'm so dumbfounded by this that I can't believe that it's genuine. But again, I have to assume that to them, it's only a problem when autistic people do it. Nothing could prepare me, though, for this fucking comment replying to the post. I believe that sometimes people with autism have stunted emotional growth and maturity, so they may gravitate towards younger interests or things that make them feel safe or secure. I totally understand. To me, it feels someone like this is not ready for an adult romantic relationship. I feel they'd benefit more from going out in a big friend group with way less buildup and pressure of a one-on-one date. For some of them, it's just too much and comes off inauthentic or forced. You know what, you're right. Autistic people just aren't ready for sex, and none of us ever will be. In fact, if we stop having sex, we can finally stop reproducing. And then, since autism is genetic, there will eventually be no more autistic people. What a fascinating idea. I feel like I've heard it somewhere before, though. I definitely have. What did Adolf Hitler call that again? And the infantilization only gets worse. People love nothing more than to treat Tanner, a 25-year-old man, as if he's a child simply because he has an upbeat attitude and a big smile and, of course, autism. So someone posts, "I have such a crush on Tanner," which, valid, you know, valid. It's the replies that are an issue. That's concerning. It's one thing to feel drawn to how kind he is and his personality in general, but to have an actual crush or feel attracted to someone with his level of cognition and ability, it feels predatory. Is it okay with you if the person crushing on him is equally cognitive? Equally cognitive! You're right, autistic people can't communicate effectively. What the fuck does equally cognitive mean? Obviously, if they are of similar ability and cognitive levels, then yeah, I don't think that is the case here, or others also saying they have crushes on the other cast. It's creepy. Again, I'm gonna repeat it. I love how the idea is that autistic people struggle to communicate effectively, but then these people dunking on autistic people can't string a fucking coherent sentence together. It's blowing my mind. Okay, so this is kind of a discussion about parasocial relationships in general, right? It's weird to see a real person that you don't know personally on reality TV and feel a connection to them because you don't actually know them. However, people who go on mainstream TV shows do often become somewhat of celebrities, and having a celebrity crush is extremely normal, as long as you're not creepy about it. If this person were sliding into Tanner's DMs trying to get nudes, yeah, that would be creepy. I would be like, ew, stop that. But to find a person you saw on TV physically attractive and endearing, that's extremely normal, okay? In a vacuum, there's nothing wrong with that. But of course, we need the nautistic brigade to show up and tell people that actually being attracted to autistic people is creepy because they don't have the same brain abilities as you. They're not as cognitive as you are, which just is not true. Yes, autistic people often have brains that work differently from neurotypical people, but that doesn't mean our brains are doing less. Now, I will say that it is true that autistic people are at a higher risk for sexual assault and domestic violence than neurotypical people in many cases, because autistic people, especially people like me who tend to interpret things very literally and don't often pick up on body language, unstated social cues, abstract nebulous vibes and things like that, it can be very natural for a lot of us to take other people at their word and assume other people are always just directly saying what they mean, which can easily lead to a more malicious person manipulating or abusing us. So it's absolutely important for autistic people to be empowered to ask questions and learn how to understand how another person communicates their intentions, especially if they want to try dating a neurotypical person. However, that is not what this post is about. This post isn't saying, I am neurotypical and I would like to hit on Tanner because he seems to take people very literally and therefore I could easily manipulate him into having sex with me. If it said that, I would be extremely concerned. In fact, I would encourage people calling the authorities on that type of person. But all this post is saying is that the viewer has a crush on him. This viewer finds him physically attractive and finds themselves attracted to his endearing personality. There is literally nothing wrong with that. Are people on the spectrum only supposed to try to find a partner who is their equal in that regard? There are plenty of neurodivergent/neurotypical relationships out in the world, and I don't think the OP is saying that Tanner's being on the spectrum is what they find attractive. The opposite, in fact. They see his personality and kindness, and that's what they're attracted to, as one should be. I see your concern, but I think it's misplaced here. I'm far less worried about this statement by OP than I am about Subodh's current girlfriend. She's a prime example of a problem. I don't know anything about Subodh's girlfriend, so I'm not going to speak to that situation. But anyway, the reply says, I think there can be differences, obviously. Tanner is great, and at the same time, he operates as though he is a child. I'm sure his inner world could be different than he externalizes, but we are kidding ourselves if we can't see that he is not mentally the age his body portrays. And that is fine. He's a great guy, but it makes sense why they paired him with someone like Katie for a date and are going in that direction. It would not make sense to have a typical person his age pursue romance with him. It would be predatory. So I guess now they're also saying that Katie, the girl he dated in season 2, is also mentally a child, which is, we'll get into that in a second. No, Tanner does not operate as though he is a child. He operates as an adult. You have too narrow of a definition of what makes someone an adult. I'm going to make this super easy for you, and then we're going to get into some evidence and sources to break this down in a second, okay? But first, let me make this super easy. Do you know what makes someone an adult? Being old enough to vote, being old enough to join the military, being old enough to be put on trial as an adult. Once you hit an age that is deemed adulthood, you are an adult. And yes, things like military service or criminal trials or even working a 40-hour-a-week job might be different for disabled people and might require different accommodations no matter what type of disability they have, but those things are going to be different for everybody. There is no one universal adult experience other than, of course, there is one thing that is universal about the adult experience, and that is having lived more than 18 years. All adults have that in common. That is how time works. Let's get this out of the way right now. We are going to break this down because it is really important, and I need to dispel this horrible notion that is out there. Mental age is not a thing. It is not a real concept. It does not exist. If you claim that a disabled person is physically one age but mentally another, you are being ableist. If you didn't know that was ableist and you maybe did this in the past, now is the time to learn, so please stay open-minded and listen to me. Here's how the website Disability Wisdom explains the concept of mental age. The concept of mental age was first introduced by Alfred Binet, co-creator of the first IQ test, in the early 20th century. Generally, mental age has been measured by comparing an individual's score on a standardized IQ test with the average performance of their same age peers. For people with IDD, mental age may also be estimated by comparing the person's demonstrated physical, speech, adaptive, or cognitive skills against the average for various age groups. Not surprisingly, mental age came about alongside the eugenics movement in the United States. Mental ages were used to classify various groups of feeble-minded individuals by severity. Adults with a mental age of 9 to 12 were classified as morons, those with a mental age of 6 to 8 were classified as imbeciles, and those with a mental age of 2 to 5 were classified as idiots. Individuals from any of these groups were thought unfit to reproduce. Besides the disturbing history of mental age theory, using mental ages to classify individuals is problematic because mental age is treated as a ceiling. Chronological age is by definition a dynamic concept. People are constantly aging, and this is part of the reason why age minimums are considered relatively acceptable in society. They are temporary. Eventually, everyone will get old enough to drive, vote, or buy a drink. In contrast, though, mental age is often described as a limit that someone reaches and cannot exceed. An adult with IDD may be labeled as having a mental age of 3, 7, or 10 years old, and once that mental age is reached, they are expected to think and act that way for the rest of their life. In addition, the website A Day in Our Shoes, which provides resources for teachers and parents creating IEPs for children with specialized educational needs, has an article called 6 Reasons to Stop Assigning a Mental Age to Disabled Students, in which it explains the following, in my opinion, very well. Most people are aware of the history of the Nazis and their selective breeding and reproduction. Most people are horrified by it, as they should be. However, what many American parents don't know or don't acknowledge is that the eugenics movement was alive and well here in the US USA too, and other quote-unquote good countries or allies. It wasn't just the German Nazis who practiced this. Laws and policies inspired by eugenic principles were used here in the USA well into the 1940s, and there are still remnants of them here. The quick definition of eugenics is selective breeding, but there were laws and policies in place to reinforce this ideology. Mental age categories were a large part of this. Mental age theory was a major feature of the eugenics movement in the USA. It is also the foundation of modern-day labels like high functioning and low functioning. A 1927 Supreme Court case, Buck versus Bell, legalized forced sterilization of disabled adults. In writing the decision, Chief Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes opined, 3 generations of imbeciles is enough. He also wrote, it is better for all the world, instead of waiting to execute degenerate offspring for a crime, or to let them starve for their imbecility. Society can prevent those who are manifestly unfit from continuing their kind. While most of these laws are no longer enforced, newer laws and court cases overturning them did not come until the 1960s, and some as recent as 1988. This is not ancient history, which is why it is so important that we be proper allies to the disability community in this effort. Mental age is used to oppress disabled people. It would be awesome if we use mental age as an opportunity for growth. He's mentally a 5-year-old, but we're working on getting him to 20. No, never works like that. Instead, it's he can't get a job / drive a car / live on his own. He's only mentally 5. Mental age has forever been used to forcibly sterilize disabled individuals, force them to live in institutions and prisons, and deny them meaningful participation in society. Not being able to do a task is not a sign of maturity. If a child cannot complete a task, they cannot complete a task. You either teach the skill or accommodate for the lack of skill, or ideally both. But why are we lumping together areas of need and age or maturity? It's illogical. In 2021, Ivanova Smith, an autistic adult with additional developmental disabilities, wrote an article for Spectrum Life magazine called Mental Age Theory Hurts, in which she explained, have you ever heard the phrase, this person has the mind of a 5-year-old in an adult body? We often hear the term mental age when medical professionals or news media describe adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. It is something very harmful that many adults with intellectual disabilities have to deal with. It has been 3 years since I last wrote on the topic of mental age theory. A lot has happened since then. I was 28 then, now I am 32, and I have definitely grown more and gained more life experience, which aging is all about. Mental age theory doesn't recognize how time gives people life experience and different things happen in different years. It's also worth noting that Smith herself is now in her mid-30s and she has 2 children of her own. She explains that giving her a fixed mental age would be straight up inaccurate. Even if she's neurodivergent now, just as she was in her 20s, she's grown with the wisdom of new life experiences the same way that a neurotypical adult would. In her 20s, she didn't yet have children. Now she has 2 kids, and as a result, her outlook and perspective on the world is different. Even if a disabled person chooses never to get married or have kids, every year of lived experience still adds to their overall understanding of the world, the same as it does for an able-bodied or a neurotypical person. People don't stop aging just because they have a disability. And yes, Smith here is still disabled, because disabled people deserve the right to get married, have children, and take agency in their own lives. Even though Smith is diagnosed as intellectually disabled, that doesn't mean she has the mental age of a child. She is an adult with an adult's mind, and just because her mind doesn't look like a neurotypical mind doesn't make it any less mature. Now, the reason I say this shit should be obvious, that obviously people don't have a different mental age than their physical age, is that that's not how time works. Time is linear. Time moves forward in one direction. Age is a measurement of time. We all know this, right? I don't need to explain to everyone here how linear time works, at least I hope I don't. Age is a measurement of how long you've been alive, how many years you've experienced. Your body and mind experience those years simultaneously. In fact, your brain is part of your body. This shit is so obvious that it almost feels like people are feigning ignorance just to justify treating disabled people in a condescending way. So when I hear people saying things like, well, he's autistic, so even though he's 25, he's more like a 10-year-old, I'm gonna shut that right down. No, that is not how this works. That person is 25 years old. That means they've experienced 25 years of life. Their mind has perceived the world for 25 years, and they have 25 years of lived experience just as an able-bodied or neurotypical person does. Those experiences may be different, and they may come to different conclusions and process the world in different ways, but that doesn't make their experiences inherently lesser. They do not equal a lower number of years. And to say they do, I don't understand how that's anything other than full-on Nazi shit. How is that not supporting a natural social hierarchy where some people's experiences are inherently more and greater than others solely by nature of their genetics. And to be clear, I'm also not trying to say here that kids are lesser than adults in any way, but adults do have more guaranteed rights than kids do. Adults can vote, adults can have children of their own, adults have the freedom to live where they want, choose their own careers, things like that. But on the topic of eugenics, let's look at how some viewers have reacted to the possibility of some Love on the Spectrum cast members choosing to have their own kids one day in the future. In fact, the subreddit really loves to discuss this. They love to discuss how they're not being ableist, they just really hope that the people from the show don't reproduce. But not in a eugenics way. Just in a, an autistic people shouldn't reproduce way that's totally different from the way Hitler meant it, right? Again, for my no sarcasm autistics in the audience. That was sarcasm. This is absolutely terrifying. I want to preface this by saying I do not know much about autism, but this show is definitely helping me understand it more. See, that's the problem. I have been curious when the members like Connor or David and Abby bring up having or adopting children. Is this realistic? I know autism is a spectrum and some are more high functioning than others. Can y'all see David and Abby having children? I'm asking this out of genuine curiosity, not being rude. How would life be like? I feel like they would need to rely on a lot of outside help from family or caregivers. Money doesn't seem to be an issue for them. Any thoughts or insight would be great. Okay, so I will say not everyone knows this, but we don't use the terms high and low functioning anymore. I don't necessarily think that everyone who says those terms means it maliciously. A lot of people are just repeating terms that they've heard other people use before without really knowing what they mean or unpacking the implications behind such a term. 5-10 years ago, I used to use those terms because I thought they were just what people said, and it took me a while to look into them and be like, no, those terms don't actually make sense. So again, here's some time to learn more. We want to learn more. We want to learn so we can know better and do better. All humans are functional. All humans function. If for you to be non-functional, that would be a medical emergency. If your heart stopped functioning, you would need to go to the emergency room. If your brain stopped functioning, maybe you're having a stroke and you need immediate medical attention. And what does it mean to function? To me, to function means to be alive. It means your body is working, it's running its functions, and as a result, you are a living, sentient, cognizant being. All autistic people are living, sentient, cognizant beings. All autistic people are 100% functional, unless they're like actively having a heart attack right now, unless there is an emergency that needs medical attention. But you know what I mean. Autism itself does not make a person more or less functional on the whole than someone else. This question, I think, seems more or less to be asked in good faith. I won't fault the OP that much for it, but some of these comments are wildly ableist in a way that only misinforms the OP and potentially drives them deeper into any preconceived ableist notions that they may have subconsciously had by default. Also, just to be clear, this question is hypothetical. I believe Abby has stated before that she doesn't even plan to have kids, so this isn't even a real situation that we're in, but let's engage with the hypothetical to see how these viewers are interpreting autism. David seems to have a severe intellectual disability in addition to autism. Neither of them can care for themselves and thus definitely should not have kids. Even if they had a whole staff to help around the clock, I don't think it would be right for them to do. Developmentally for the children, I think it would be a hardship and possibly also traumatic to have parents that are intellectually disabled and whom they would outpace at a very young age. I agree. I don't believe it would be fair to the child. Imagine growing up with the role reversal of being the highest functioning at like 8. I can't imagine your parent could ever adequately emotionally support you either in that type of situation. Okay, first of all, I hope we've already sufficiently debunked mental age, so no, Abby and David are not mentally 8 years old. Nobody is except actual 8-year-olds, because age is a measurement of time, so jot that down. Second, because Abby and David are both autistic, it's highly likely that their child would also be autistic because autism is genetic. So I think it would actually be amazing for an autistic child to grow up with not one, but 2 parents who are both autistic, because that parent will have such a greater understanding of what their child is experiencing. God forbid autistic children get actually autistic parents instead of hashtag autism moms like Tanner's bitch ass mother. Anyway, back to Abby and David and this weird comment chain about whether or not they're capable of reproducing. Jesus Christ. In what way do you think their child would outpace them? What specific intellectual disabilities do Abby and David even have? I watched the entire show and neither of them ever mentioned having a specific intellectual disability. They're both autistic, and autism is in and of itself not an intellectual disability. That's not how it's categorized. Now, different professionals define different intellectual disabilities differently, but one consistent definition that I've been able to find is that intellectual disabilities indicate an IQ of 7 70 or lower. This often occurs with diagnoses like Down syndrome, fetal alcohol syndrome, traumatic brain injury, and Fragile X syndrome. Now, people with these intellectual disabilities can also be autistic in the same way that, according to the Intellectual Disabilities Wikipedia page, people with these disabilities are also statistically more likely to have epilepsy as well, but epilepsy is not in and of itself an intellectual disability. Let's also keep in mind that the definition of intellectual disabilities isn't an exact science. Human brains are hella complex, okay? We don't really know how reliable of a metric IQ tests are because there's been a lot of back and forth about controlling for basically infinite variables when it comes to measuring something as abstract and varied as the general concept of intelligence. But autism on its own does not indicate an intellectual disability. Autistic people often have what's called spiky profiles, meaning that whereas neurotypical people tend to score very average in multiple different disciplines, autistic people tend to score very high in some and very low in others, leading to the same average capabilities, but those capabilities being highly concentrated in different areas. For example, a neurotypical person might be able to do math at an average speed and pick up on social cues the average amount you'd expect, whereas an autistic person might be able to do mental math instantaneously but lack any ability to pick up on social cues at all. And that's just one example. For another autistic person, it might be the reverse, or it might be completely different qualities being measured. My point is, autistic people tend to have extreme highs and lows, whereas neurotypical people tend to flatline more, if that makes sense. And even among neurotypical people, everyone has different skills and talents, and everyone specializes in different areas. I know this seems like a tangent and that I'm stating extremely obvious things, but this is all to say, why are people assuming that an autistic person is less emotionally intelligent than a neurotypical person? Neither Abby nor David have ever come out saying they have an intellectual disability. They might, or they might not, and whether or not they do, even if they are intellectually disabled, they are still allowed to make their own choice regarding whether or not they want to have children. Like, let me make that perfectly clear. While autism itself is not automatically an intellectual disability on its own, even if a person has an additional intellectual disability, they're still allowed to have kids. Discouraging disabled people from having kids is how eugenics starts. That's what it is based on. But what if it's bad for the child? You know what's bad for the child? Being born to ableist-ass parents who make you go to a CEO's work week level of hours of ABA therapy where you're punished for not acting normal enough. Yet no one's ever tried to take away people's rights to have kids based on ideology, have they? You can't go down that path, okay? All humans, by nature of being human, have the inherent right to have children if they so choose. How far down the what if it's bad for the child rabbit hole do you want to go? Rich people can provide more resources for their children than poor people can. Do you want to stop poor people from having kids too? Yeah, a lot of the people who are saying this type of thing, they actually do also want to stop poor people from having children. Look up the history of forced sterilization of poor and disabled people. People will really be out here forcing underage girls who were assaulted to carry babies to term and then live in poverty as a single mother, then turn around and say autistic people shouldn't be reproducing, it's bad for the child. I can't see what their problem would possibly be. I know that I wouldn't be a good mother because I struggle with so much executive dysfunction. I get way too hyper-focused. I can't shift my focus fast enough to keep up with the way that a parent probably should be able to keep up with their kids. I'm terrible at keeping things organized, and also I physically would struggle with having kids because it's risky with my scoliosis and I'm worried about doing permanent damage to my back. So that's why I've chosen not to have kids. But if I really, really wanted to, if I felt that passion within me, I would find a way to make it work. This comment goes out of its way to say that even if Abby and David hired a housekeeper or a nanny to help them with the things that they might struggle with, that they still shouldn't have kids because they're too autistic to be good parents, whatever that means. I don't think Abby realizes the implications of having a baby. I don't think David has any interest in it. I was very curious about this considering we just saw their family talking about having the talk with them. Not sure how they'd be able to live alone without external support, but then Abby is drinking wine and talking about kids. It seemed a bit different than how their families portrayed it earlier. Abby doesn't realize the implications of having a baby. What does that mean? I didn't realize we were in the presence of a mind reader. I didn't realize this commenter was capable at looking at a few hours of edited TV footage and determining whether or not a woman they've never met internally ponders the implications of motherhood. Autism can be genetic, so autistic people having kids isn't exactly unheard of. I have a friend who's autistic and his son is also autistic. They are doing well. That being said, with Abby and David's support needs, I don't envision them having kids. They've been dating for 3 or so years and still live at home. I don't think it's happening. I'm unsure with Connor. His anxiety can be intense and I don't think he drives. Not sure how that would work with kids. I do think Georgie would be an awesome mom though. First of all, you don't have to drive to have kids. Again, if we want to get into an intersectional analysis, We can talk about how walkable cities are a solution, but I'm already putting enough of a woke leftist target on my back for this video, so let's not even get into that. I agree with parts of this comment, but not all of it. The first part of the comment was great because it acknowledged that autistic people can and do have kids, but this person then says that Abby and David probably won't have kids because they've been dating for 3 years and still live at home. Okay. Let me be my literal ass autistic self for a minute. What does live at home mean? Remember, autistic people communicate very literally, so from my perspective, when I see the phrase live at home, I'm like, yeah, no shit, everybody lives at home. The definition of a home is the place where you live, so to say someone lives at home is like being like, her home is the place where she lives. Like, it's a reflexive statement that says nothing. I guess from context, I can assume they mean that Abby and David still live with their parents, which also isn't true. David does not live with his parents. David lives with his sister. He shares a condo with her, and siblings are not parents. They're more like roommates. Abby does still live with her mom, but so do a lot of people in their mid-20s. Have you seen the housing market lately? Have you seen rising rent prices? Have you seen the levels of inflation we've had in this country without wages rising to meet it? Have we seen that the cast of Love on the Spectrum wasn't paid for their work? Abby is a disabled person. She does need accommodations, and as a result, it's hard for her to work a full-time job. It's hard even for people who do work full-time jobs to be able to afford to move out of their parents' houses right now. Abby lives at home with her mom, like a lot of 26-year-olds, but when an autistic person lives with their mom, that means they don't ever deserve to have kids. Also, Abby does have a job. She crochets hats, and has her own business. She's a really cool boss babe. You know what? I'm gonna link the profiles below of the cast members of the show so that you can support their own small businesses because they deserve to be paid. The audience reception to Love on the Spectrum really shows that while the series does give autistic people some screen time and some representation, it doesn't do much to dispel neurotypical viewers' already existing ableist biases. Instead, it takes this radically centrist approach that tries to appease everyone but instead provides no actual value to most viewers. Why is this show? In disability communities, we have a saying that goes, nothing about us without us. That's to say, if you're going to produce media representing disabled people, especially in an era where disabilities is not only severely underrepresented, but also constantly threatened under a fascist government, then you'd better have disabled people themselves involved in that media's creation. And you could make the argument that Love on the Spectrum isn't excluding autistic people because, hey, most of the cast is autistic. And that's great, but what about the production team? What about the editors? What about the creator and head of the project, Cian O'Clery? I can't claim to know the individual personal lives of each person involved in the show behind the scenes, nor do I think any of them owe the audience of strangers personal information about themselves. Like, if Cian O'Clery himself is autistic, he doesn't owe me that information. He's allowed to keep that private if he wants, but I do think it's worth asking why the production team made some of the choices they did, especially if any of them are also autistic. What I can't understand is why Cian O'Clery even let someone like Tanner be on the show in the first place, someone who is not looking for a relationship, whose mother applied for him looking to get famous for herself, someone who is highly uncomfortable even talking about dating. Why would Cian look at Tanner's application and say, yes, this young man has never expressed any interest in dating or relationships, but his mom says that he's got a really big smile and golden retriever energy, and we need someone like that to make the neurotypical viewers gush about how cute he is, so that'll get us ratings. At whose expense? Why did the show cut someone like Kaylin, who is autistic and works in autism advocacy, who represents a part of the spectrum we don't often see, someone who's outwardly good at social interaction but struggles with sensory and executive functioning issues behind the scenes, plus someone who herself is looking for a relationship, in favor of casting someone like Tanner who doesn't want a relationship? Or what about all the women online, especially the women of color, who are majorly underrepresented in the show, who applied to the show but were turned down for being too normal or too edgy, or just not fitting the show's specific box of straight edge autistic who's socially awkward enough to make memes about, but not so socially awkward that they make neurotypical viewers uncomfortable? Instead, they said, let's cast someone who doesn't even really want to be on this show, but his mom will definitely publicize it a lot on her shitty influencer journey. These are all shortcomings of the show, and it's a shame because, like I said, the show has a lot of potential. It is a really big deal to show so many autistic people and feature their stories being told from their own perspective perspectives. It is a big deal to interview a largely autistic cast for a Netflix show with such a large viewership. This show could be doing so much good for autism awareness. Not awareness in the general sense of like, now we're aware of autism. I mean awareness of the wide variety of people you'll meet across the spectrum, awareness of the variety of skills and talents different autistic people have, and what we have to offer as individuals. Instead, the show chose to fall into some terrible old autism stereotypes, like the one where parents have just as much of a say in autism advocacy as actually autistic people should. It's fallen into the trap of trying to remain apolitical at a time when the community covered is highly politicized in today's climate and facing threats under our current political administration. This is to say that everything else aside, I do still have high hopes for season 4. If Love on the Spectrum listens to criticisms like this and chooses to expand its scope, it does have a lot of potential to become something great. But in order to do that, it has to cut some of the time that parents are on screen. Use that time instead to feature more autistic people. Feature an older woman of color who learned of her autism in her late 40s after having 2 kids. Feature a level 3 autistic person who doesn't speak but communicates through writing and sign language. Feature some autistic millennials who are estranged from their families but found community in local alternative subcultures, and bring back Kaylin! So those are my thoughts on Love on the Spectrum as a whole. I'm curious what your guys' thoughts were on this show. If you watched it, did you like it? Did you not like it? Again, I'm seeing a wide variety of different perspectives on it, and I think there are a lot of different valid perspectives because I do see a lot of positives in the show, especially, you know, in a time when we don't get a lot of autistic people on screen talking about their own perspectives. It is a pretty big deal and it's pretty monumental to do that. So on the one hand, I do commend Netflix for wanting to do that, but on the other hand, to do so in a way that takes this centrist approach and gives these parents this huge platform to spread misinformation is just grossly irresponsible with such a golden opportunity that you were given. And so that kind of sours me on the whole experience, but I am curious in hearing other people's thoughts on the show as well. Other than that, this was a big deep dive of a video. I bet you can tell how long it is, but I will be back with more videos coming soon about a variety of different topics. We've got more book reviews, more discussions of book community drama, just a variety of different things coming for you on this channel. So make sure you're subscribed, stay tuned, and I will see you guys again soon. But in the meantime, enjoy your special interests, play with toys if you like to. Don't let anyone tell you it makes you less of an adult. In fact, I would say I'm gonna go play with my American Girl dolls right now, but I have to work, so that's not true, unfortunately. I am gonna go walk my dog and stare at my dolls for a little bit. Maybe while I'm editing the ad read for this video, I'll have my video production intern Z sitting on my lap so that she can keep me company while I do this. I guess that makes me too immature to ever have sex. I'll have to disappoint my husband with that later. I'll see you guys later. Bye!
Get you some nuts.
Yeah, you effing.
Up yours, woke moralist. We'll see who cancels who.